All right, all right, all right. What's up, y'all? I'm Daniel Encarnacion, and I got Chavis Vaughn Bradford. Did I get that name right?
Yes, yes.
Cool, cool. Um, who are you and what do you do?
Um, who am I? That's a deep question. I am a nascent physicist. I'm still in the process of, you know, getting my prerequisites, but I'm somewhat unorthodox in the sense that I didn't have a linear path towards doing physics like a lot of people do. But basically, um, my wife kind of inspired me to get into quantum cosmology. I don't come from an extremely academic background. It's more of I'd say, a blue collar or white collar background. To put myself through college, I drive tractor tankers. A lot of people try to hide from stuff like that, like, oh, I'm already doing this. No, I'm very honest. Like, I'm in the nascent stages of it. But I guess another thing that makes me kind of weird is the non-linear way in which I learn. I learn the complicated stuff first and then the easier stuff second. So that's pretty much who I am.
That's interesting. So when you say the hardest stuff, you're talking about the actual material, right?
Yes.
The story, I guess you could say, and then working
Mhm.
your way backwards to
Yes.
the physics
Yes.
and the mathematics and all that.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, all right. So where you at with that now?
Um. Honestly, the momentum of it was really strong in 2017 and 18. It was even up to a point where I met Nobel laureate Frank Wilczek at
Oh,
a conference with my wife on dark matter,
dope.
but the coronavirus put that to a halt. So everything's kind of stagnant right now. But I suppose after the pandemic, it'll pretty much the momentum will grow again in the direction I was going in towards the GRE and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
That's where we're at with that now.
Yeah. So I went to school for chemistry. I just graduated
Ooh,
in June 2020. I had
oh,
a minor
congratulations.
in. Thank you. Thank you. I had a minor in physics, and I'm pretty interested in quantum mechanics and physics, especially as it pertains to like chemical systems and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm,
So I like a lot of the content that you post because some of
mm-hmm.
it is related to that. But I mean, you post a wide range of concepts that are really interesting to me, from genetic neuroscience and
hmm
all the way to quantum mechanics, quantum cosmology, the history of quantum mechanics, which is
hmm
that's a really interesting story. So
Yes.
the background story of quantum physics and really the our technological society, right? Because
Yes.
this story about all these people, Dirac,
hmm
Einstein, Bose, all these people, like they allowed what we're doing right now. They actually allowed that to happen. All these electronics. If it wasn't for them, we
Yes.
wouldn't have these electronics.
Yes.
Yeah,
You're 100% correct in that. Um, yeah, the history of quantum mechanics it starts off very strange with Michelson and Morrissey, and that's dealing really with relativistic physics, but that's still intertwined with quantum mechanics. And basically,
yeah.
I'll
Who were those
recommend this
guys?
video. Michelson and Morley did an interferometer experiment. I forget his first name, but it's Michelson and Morley, two different people who did an interferometer experiment that disproved the luminous ether. There's this
Oh,
notion that like if light, like if you had two different things in two different reference frames, and they're having a certain kind of velocity, that the light would have that extra velocity. Like if you were traveling in space and you threw a football, it would have the velocity of the spacecraft plus the extra velocity you gave it. Well, light is a constant, and they found this out through this experiment. But with quantum mechanics, it was Max Planck in Germany.
yeah, the
I
black
really
body radiation.
understand the notion of how the ultraviolet catastrophe related to black body radiation, but to everyone watching this, there's this person named Dr. Physics A. I think that's their name, Dr. Physics A. Um, they explained it perfectly when it comes to how uh, photons are related to the ultraviolet catastrophe. Because before that, they really did think that the energy was going to be somehow infinite when it comes to light. But with the discrete chunks of photon or discrete chunks of energy dealing with Planck's constant and frequency and things like that, that's really the start of the quantum revolution. That's when we start to find out that there's properties on microscopic scales that differ from things on macroscopic scales, such as dynamics, kinematics, heat, light, uh, radiation on a macroscopic scale. But that was the start, was Max Planck in Germany, pretty
Mm.
much, start of quantum mechanics. And it just got weirder from there.
So you want to explain what the ultraviolet? I don't even remember what the ultraviolet catastrophe was. You want to
How do I
explain it?
explain this? The ultraviolet catastrophe is kind of weird to explain. Um, it's dealing with the notion that uh, light was a wave. That was kind of the notion in the early 20th century. And the ultraviolet catastrophe is kind of like a plotted graph that shows the entire electromagnetic spectrum. But somehow in this, when it gets to the ultraviolet part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and I may be paraphrasing this weirdly, but there are things, there are phenomena that are perceived to be infinite when they really weren't. And when Max Planck had introduced this notion that there were discrete photons, that eliminated that notion.
Yeah. Is it like the discrete energy levels
Yes,
as opposed to this continuous idea?
yes. That helped with the ultraviolet catastrophe. That is one of the, basis of quantum mechanics, and he did this. And this is kind of related to the history of Germany. This is pre-Weimar Republic, so this is before the 20s and World War II and the Depression and all that kind of stuff. So this is early 20th century Germany, a different Germany than the one preceding that time. But yeah, that's what started it. Now that we could get into a weird conversation because this is intertwined to a lot of different things. How did these particular people find this? Now, when it comes to physics, I think you mentioned Bose earlier, who that deals with a certain kind of statistics, oddly enough, about photons, which are massless force, and that deals with different spin statistics and stuff like that. But Bose in India was also, you know, also had an intellectual movement. So this gets into another weird discussion that is inevitably going to be had these days with people is this culture or society have anything to do with how people discover things? And then that leads to an even deeper question, because if you stop at that, you're gonna make people upset. And that's I don't have a problem making people upset, but rightfully so, because there's an underlying neurological basis to it as well that emerges into the sociological aspects. And when you look at that, it transcends any kind of notions that there was a race superior than the other. It was literally who found what algorithms first and how that emerged in certain societies. But the reason Max Planck was able to do this was because of years and years and years of discipline and certain institutions being in place for him to have the experimental apparatuses to test hypotheses on dealing with the ultraviolet catastrophe in light. So it oscillates. These notions, the history of quantum mechanics oscillates between apparatuses, experiments, and mathematical models, and the people themselves, the society they lived in, the apparatus they had, the institutions they had. We can only speculate, honestly, what kind of neurological situation they were in. Newton was purported to have some kind of schizophrenia after he abandoned his physics for alchemy and things of that sort. So we can somewhat speculate based off of historical records what their mental state was. But that is very important, especially during these, because we're approaching a time where um, this is an odd thing to talk about. We're approaching a time where people are going to want to delete history.
Yep.
And the reason I bring this up, and I am going to oscillate back to quantum mechanics, there's know much about them.
Hey,
Because if I personally,
you kind of like skipped a second.
okay,
Like the video lagged a little bit. Just go back like 10 seconds or 5 seconds.
Okay. We're oscillating. First talked about Max Planck, and we talked about the beginning of quantum mechanics. And when this present time in January of 2021, when a time period where history is being revised, and I hate to say that because it's kind of a right-wing talking point, and I am quite apolitical. I'm neither left or right wing.
Yeah.
It's one of their talking points, so it is kind of weird to say this, but history is kind of being rewritten by the victors. The reason I say that is because now Max Planck in himself was a noble figure. He tried his best to go against Nazism and the persecution of Jews in Europe. However, there are other figures after him that, such as Werner Heisenberg, that wasn't the case. Now, fast forward to today, there's the James Webb Space Telescope. It's going to be the predecessor to the Hubble Space Telescope. Edwin Hubble was just this guy who, in the 20s, who smoked his cigar, looked at the universe, found out that it was expanding and things of that sort. James Webb, I don't know much about him as an astrophysicist, but the telescope does have his namesake. However, there are people who want to change the name of the telescope because it's been purported that he had some kind of homophobic tendencies or discriminatory tendencies. And this is where we start, because in this present time, that's where we're at. We're at a time now that's different than times previous to this one, where we have to question, how are we going to view physics in the future? Will these constants even still have these people's namesake? And what does that have to do with quantum mechanics? What does that have to do with any of this? It's just a question as to what are we focusing on when it comes to physics? Are we focusing on physics, or are we focusing on revenge? And that goes back, now going back to Max Planck. During that time, there were a lot of unfortunate events to take place, even after Max Planck and with Albert Einstein. For him to somewhat prove gravitational lensing with Arthur Eddington, he had to look at this eclipse in 1919. I think that's the year 1919. There was this eclipse that somewhat gave some observational proof to gravitational lensing. Now, for people who don't know, gravitational lensing is when the gravitational field bends light in a certain direction. And to prove this, he needed the telescope, the apparatus that was the telescope, and Arthur Eddington to provide observational evidence for this aspect of relativity. But even then, it was in the midst of World War I.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. So at that time, was it already accepted that gravity is bending space-time? Or was that like a part of the,
That's an interesting question. Not really, no. And that gets into this notion, is mathematics or these theories invented or discovered?
Mm.
Are we finding them along the way? Are we coming up with these things, these abstractions to describe them? That's a deep, complex conversation. But no, it was not totally accepted at that time. Um, some say nor should it been because it wasn't proven. But
Gotcha.
after that point, um, it was pretty much that there was observational evidence for it. And even weirder than that, a lot of people may not notice Albert Einstein didn't win a Nobel Prize for relativity. He won it for quantum mechanics, for the photoelectric effect.
Mm.
So that's why I kind of started off with the Michelson-Morley experiment, because his notions of light um, and relativity is very much intertwined with quantum mechanics, and it evolves all the way into the philosophical debates as to whether quantum mechanics is indeterminate and does Spinoza's God play dice and things of that sort, and his arguments with Niels Bohr. And that also relates to today. Niels Bohr was a Jewish man. I think he was Danish, and he had a lot of problems with Werner Heisenberg, because Werner Heisenberg was trying to convince Bohr to help Germany with a nuclear weapon. And the whole reason the United States got a nuclear weapon was because they was afraid Germany had already made one, because Einstein had pretty much told the United States the Germans could possibly work on this. And this bounces back to today. You know, we're in a time period where people want to eliminate anything that may hinder this utopia in which we want to make a place where there's no pain or punishment. Now, am I for or against that? I don't have a yes or no answer for that. However, the reason I bounce back to today is because in this very time, we're entering a time period where it's going to become controversial to utter the names of people who were involved in things that hindered human aid. Well, it's complicated. I don't want to say hindered human agency. It gave agency to some people and took it away from others. But the fact that it took it away from anyone is making it where revisionists, historical revisionists, will want to either eliminate these people
So are you saying
completely.
the scientists that aided governments in doing certain programs? Is that what you mean by people who
Um,
hindered? Or what people are you
well,
talking about?
the people who are hindered or the people who are doing the hindering
The hindering.
in the historical,
In
the
the
people who
who's
are
the
doing the
people?
hinder, it is a fact that Werner Heisenberg in himself didn't do a lot of hindering. He was under a regime that did. Same with Werner von Braun. He didn't. Well, with him, it's a little bit more complicated because he did use the Mittelwerk concentration camp as slaves for the V2 rocket, which is the prerequisite for the Saturn V, for the SpaceX rocket, for all known rockets.
Yeah,
It's
and
pretty
this
much,
is the guy that headed NASA at one point, right?
yes, he headed NASA at one point. Now, back in the 60s, the government with Operation Paperclip, they just was like, they redacted a lot of things saying, well, he was never in with National Socialism, we'll just redact it. And that being mixed with, and I'm not a conspiracist. I'm going to only talk about things that I know happened. That mixed with, like, with the government saying, okay, he was never in the National Socialism, and at the same time partaking in things such as the Tuskegee experiment and other type of experiments on people in America, is making it where people are going to start revising history. Now, yes, Werner von Braun and Werner Heisenberg were not the ones hindering people, but they gave scientific advancement to the regimes that were. As I said, the um, Jews at the Middelburg concentration camp did have to make certain V2 rockets. Now, why am I touching on this and bouncing between this and the history of quantum mechanics? Because it's going to be very awkward in how we semantically discuss science if we cannot talk about the history of it objectively. Now, whether our moral stances waver, with the winds of time and situations is kind of a question. But whatever really happened should be discussed. It should be discussed openly, and whatever mistakes we thought happened, we have to acknowledge that they actually happened.
Yeah.
But back
Can
to
you do me a favor? Can you put the radio down? Like when I speak, I can like hear myself like echoing.
Yes. Let me turn that down a bit. Yes, at 100%. Okay.
That'll do it.
Okay. But yes. Now with quantum mechanics, I'll speed this part up a little bit. Okay. You have Max Planck. Werner Heisenberg pretty much discovers that can't measure the position and momentum of a quantum particle at the same time. If you know more about one, you know less about the other. The Bohr atom. There was the Rutherford atom before that, but we'll just speed up. There's the Bohr atom that talks about discrete chunks in which the electron goes to different states whenever a photon interacts with it. There's Dirac.
Would be the protons and the neutrons in the middle, and then the circles around it. Right?
Yes.
Right? Yep.
Yes. And that was very strange because it's almost non-local in a sense in which it's going to the next step or going to the next atomic quantum state or level, but it's not going into space in between. That we think it's not. There's other notions dealing with Bohmian mechanics, which I'll get into later, that may dispute something like that. But the consensus now is that it's just going to the next level. Then after World War II actually somewhat helped quantum mechanics and hindered it. It helped in some sense with certain research, but it hindered the number of citations by 1944 and 45, which completely dipped. And the war actually made it, both world wars actually made it where there weren't Nobel Prizes given out in certain years. So
yeah, I seen you made a post about that. Was that in Germany or was that like globally?
It was globally.
Okay, so there was a lack of research. That's what I'm extrapolating from what you're saying, that there wasn't papers being written because maybe everybody was focused on the war effort. Or
it's complicated. On the one hand, when it comes to papers, yes, there was a hindrance in that sense, but the war actually accelerated research, nuclear research. So it's complicated. On the one hand, it did hinder citations and things of that sort, but on the other hand, it accelerated research in rockets, radar, the whole now getting towards cosmology. World War II was a prerequisite for us discovering the cosmic microwave background because Penzias and Wilson was, serendipitously just looking across the sky with this kind of apparatus that came out of World War II. Its technology evolved into what they needed to look at the cosmic microwave background, and they were just looking at the sky, whatnot, and they found that there was this noise everywhere. And they thought it was bird poop on the apparatus or whatnot, but it wasn't. It was the cosmic microwave background. And they, but my point with that, with Penzias and Wilson, the prerequisite for that apparatus was World War II. So in some ways, it helped and hindered physics simultaneously.
So what I'm getting from this is that it hindered public.
Yes.
The public because science is a very public thing, right? People are sharing information constantly. They're
Yes.
everybody's trying to, there's a lot of clout chasing that goes on in science. Everybody wants to publish, so it's clout chasing.
Yeah.
But that's part of the community and how things evolve in the scientific community. But when things are going on, like in war, that's all that information, all that research is now it's private, because
Yes.
this can give us an edge over the enemy. But
Yes.
it also, it takes away from the public discourse of science and the process, the scientific process publicly. But it's almost like every time there's a war, we make like a quantum leap, if you will,
Exactly.
in our technology and in our science. As far as like going developing new science and also applying that
Mhm.
science to new technology. And now we got GPS and all
Yes.
these other instruments, and these wars made our society. They give our society, I mean, they made our society in a lot of ways, obviously the socio political way, but the technological backdrop of our society was defined by these wars because
It
of
was.
the, the
Um,
the technologies
first,
that were developed to fight each other.
first jet, first rocket, radar, the list goes on and on and on and on. Now, but I don't know if academics share the same empirical enthusiasm that you just had and that I have too, because we're entering a time where there were people who met their demise at that time. Um, and that happening conflicts with the utopia that we're approaching, or that people want. It conflicts with that. Now, we're us just saying that war is a prerequisite for all these technologies is a fact. But now we're approaching a time where we have a large faction of people asking, did the ends justify the means? And I'm not in this faction of people, but I don't think they can be ignored, because they're controlling academic funding. They control the conversation now, and they don't want to have a society that, and you know what, it's debatable as to whether we should do this or not. I'll get into what I really think about it later on in this. But what is happening is anything that hinders anyone's agency, indigenous people, Jewish people, black people, anyone who has when which a certain power who has more agency or more advancement hinders that of another. There are factions of the society, and a lot of them in the intellectual community, that want that eliminated completely. Um, yes, humans were somewhat sacrificial guinea pigs or sacrificial lab rats for the advancement of science. And it worked in a lot of ways, like you just said. We got a lot of technologies out of it.
Yeah, and
However,
this is slightly unrelated, but even in like the world of drug development, right? Um,
yes,
my view is that there there is corruption in the pharmaceutical world, but nonetheless, right?
hmm
The the amount of data and learning that we're getting from the pharmaceutical world is astronomical. Like if drug companies didn't have that emphasis, that incentive to learn about cells, tissues, and organ systems, we would not know about our bodies. Um, so it's an interesting dance that we humans do with exploitation and violence, and I mean, it's basically profit.
yes.
The knowledge that we're getting is like the profit from the exploitation in a way, which is it's weird. It's weird.
It really is. Now, okay, I'm bouncing between topics. Let me make this more coherent. Okay. I'll get into more coherent state with quantum cosmology, then I'll bounce back to how we're socially going about science, and then cybernetics, and because the end of this is based on cybernetics and genetics. But okay, quantum
That's a
mechanics.
good, yeah.
Um, moving on with that, with the Bohr atom and things of that sort, and with analyzing wave functions of certain quantum states. And I already mentioned Penzias and Wilson and the cosmic microwave background. The cosmic microwave background is basically the uh, initial light of the universe that happened about 380,000 years after the Big Bang, but with certain anisotropies and inhomogeneities and patterns in the cosmic microwave background, we can extrapolate certain data about it. And using this data along with data from the Large Hadron Collider, which somewhat mimics the universe in the first, I'd say, 10 to the 0.001 seconds, when there's a lot of things dealing with quark gluon plasma and things of that sort. It emulates that. And this is all somewhat connected. And this is basically what I'm going towards, and me and my wife are going towards. We're studying the quantum mechanical states of the early universe. But there are some other aspects of quantum mechanics that are weird, that differ from our macroscopic reality. Another one is, which was also discovered in Germany, quantum tunneling, in which there is a quantum particle can go through a barrier that a classical particle cannot go through or surmount. There's non-locality. There's, if you have the spin of one particle and the spin of another particle, and they are entangled, if you change the spin of the the other one will change instantaneously in a non-local manner. There's
Do we know the mechanism of that? That one's weird. Do we know the mechanism of that yet? Like, is there any logic to it?
That one has been of a very contentious debate. Now, okay, it first started with Einstein and Bohr. This is it's very interesting and weird. Now, as to where I stand on this, I get into that in the end. But basically, Einstein's like, no, 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 no. There's something you're not seeing in this. Quantum mechanics is not wrong, but it is at best incomplete. And Bohr's like, no, this is what's happening. If you have these two particles spin up and spin down, and you change them, and they're entangled, they're gonna, instantaneously change the other one. And it was a very fierce debate about this. John Bell, who's an Irish physicist, dealing with Bell inequalities, somewhat on the mathematical and theoretical side, showed that quantum entanglement was real and non-locality real. But the man that I really look up to with this is, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, Alain Aspect. He was a French experimental physicist who used calcium ions and various apparatuses with atomic clocks to see if quantum entanglement was actually real, and his experiment pretty much confirmed it. It is a real thing. As to what is happening, I don't think physicists, we know how to use it and manipulate it, but I don't think we understand why. And that's getting into various interpretations of quantum mechanics. There's the Copenhagen interpretation, the many worlds interpretation, there's Bohmian mechanics. That's getting into various interpretations of quantum mechanics. And that's when you get into people like Edward Witten and Juan Mendelssohn and extremely theoretical things dealing with string theory and loop quantum gravity and things of that sort. And that's getting in towards the 80s and the 90s, because the basic history of physics, it's mostly concentrated in Europe and India to a degree. Then it spreads to other parts of the world. The Chinese, this is another weird aspect of physics. There's such things called helicity and chirality, which is kind of how things are right-handed or left-handed. And the Wu experiment, which was done by a Chinese American woman, proved that there was some kind of, there's such thing as CPT violation, a charge, parity, and time. And with cobalt atoms, she showed that there is certain asymmetry when it comes to matter and how it interacts with our existence. But yes, charge, parity, and time. Because it's still now I'm bouncing all over the place. That goes back to Amy Noether and her conservation laws. Um, it, Basically, conservation of energy, the conservation of momentum, the conservation of information. All of these things where you have to what you put in is what you get out in physics. And basically, when you're balancing a chemistry equation or anything like that, or balancing a physics equation, the amount of energy you put in is the amount you're going to get out. There's not going to be this extra energy there, and it's dealing with the conservation laws. But there are some very weird things with that the Wu experiment proved, dealing with certain baryon asymmetries in our universe. And so now we have the fact that light is in discrete chunks. Matter can go on a quantum levels, can go through barriers in which classical particles or classical matter cannot. There's quantum entanglement, which automatically switches the spin of particles with in a non-local manner, meaning that with most other phenomenon, there's this causal chain of events. If it's relativistic, chemical, kinematic, sound, electricity, there's some steps happening. Quantum entanglement is not like that. And there's non-locality, there's all kind of weird phenomenon. Relativity discovered a lot of weird phenomenon. The fact gravitational time dilation, in which and this goes to what you were saying about GPS. The GPS would not work if we didn't have atomic clocks that were precise enough to compensate for time dilation, because time is actually slower in the reference frame of a gravitational field. And when you compare these clocks, you'll see the clocks in a gravitational field are slower than ones that are not. And that's not a well.
So time goes faster in space, right? So the
Yes.
satellites in space move faster, and there
Yes.
needs to be something to sync them in.
Yes. And that's weird. All these things we discovered in the 20th century are counterintuitive to our everyday life. Our everyday life that is not, I want to say it isn't on a quantum mechanical level. The notion of proton tunneling can cause mutations in the ACTG sequence of DNA. That Nature has somewhat published papers on that. So quantum biology is a thing. Quantum mechanics affects our life. Quantum tunneling is needed for our electronics and things of that sort. And just like I said, the notion of gravitational time dilation and the equivalence principle, notions of that are needed for our satellites to work. Now, I didn't touch on the equivalence principle. That's basically, if you are in a rocket accelerating at 1G and you are on Earth just standing at 1G, you cannot tell the difference. That's pretty much the equivalence principle. And there's gravitational lensing, where you can look in the universe and you see this bulging ring of galaxies behind other galaxies lensed into our telescopes. And that bounces back to certain things about quantum cosmology. I know I'm bouncing all over the place, but that's something else that I kind of have been studying, dealing with the lensing, the gravitational lensing of the cosmic microwave background itself. And basically, what I'm really trying to do in quantum cosmology is find out what happened before the Big Bang. I may do that in my lifetime. I may not. I may get to a certain era. And you mentioned earlier, there's the history of the universe, we're really in the era of galaxies. There was the era of atoms.
So yeah, let's go back to that,
Yeah.
right? So
Mhm.
you were talking about the Big Bang,
Yes.
and the first light that happened after the Big Bang.
Hmm.
Um, so you want to just like walk us through the quantum cosmology and
Okay.
how we got to
Um,
the age of galaxies and what can we expect? Not we as you and me, because we're not going to be here, but what could whatever conscious being is here can expect in the future?
okay. I'll work my way backwards from now and
Okay.
go to the beginning and possibly before that, then work my way forward from now. Okay, we're in the era of galaxies. 1 billion years ago was the era of atoms, in which the photons became free from the cosmic microwave background. The first atoms formed. The water you drink, and if you ever, I'm sure you have kids around, they like balloons. All that, those two elements, hydrogen and helium, were made in the Big Bang. Most of this other stuff were made in stars due to stellar nucleosynthesis. But working our way back about 3 minutes after the Big Bang, um, there were nuclei and fusion starts to create these atoms. That the universe is cooling down. Before that is the era of nucleosynthesis, in which there was 75% hydrogen, 25% helium by mass. Before that, you're at 0.001 seconds. And this is where it starts to get kind of weird again. This is going back to Dirac and somewhat the Wu experiment to a degree. It gets weird at this point. There's a weird thing happening where matter and antimatter annihilate each other, but somehow there's more matter than antimatter. That's what they mean by baryon asymmetry. So at that point, it's a little strange. Why is matter, you know, more prevalent than antimatter? So at that, we have a mystery right there. If anybody who wants to go for Nobel Prize. Um,
Mm.
Before that, we're 10 to
Yeah,
the
I'm still
negative.
hearing that echo. Can you put it down again a little bit
Sure.
more?
Just a little bit more. Okay, now about 36. Okay. Um, Now we're at 10 to the negative 10 seconds after the Big Bang. This is the electroweak era, in which the electromagnetic and weak nuclear forces become distinct. I never touched on the weak nuclear force. The weak nuclear force was for people who are at home, your smoke detector is something that deals with the weak nuclear force. It's basically dealing with nuclear decay. Um, when atoms transmute into a daughter isotope, I'm not sure what americium transmutes into. I don't know if it's neptunium or something. It transmutes into a daughter isotope, and that's how you're able to use a smoke detector. Um, the weak nuclear force is responsible for nuclear decay with the emission of W and Z bosons. Um, and there's fundamental forces. There's photons, gluons, W and Z bosons, leptons, quarks in the Higgs field. The Higgs field gives uh, leptons and quarks mass. Doesn't really interact with the electromagnetic radiation, which is photons, and the strong nuclear force, which holds atoms together, which are gluons. But I have to touch on that because when the universe cooled at 10 to the negative 10 seconds, the electromagnetic force and the weak nuclear force diverged. They became two different forces. There's a such thing as the electroweak force, that's getting into quantum quant, I want to say quantum chromodynamics, but might be wrong on that because that deals more with gluons. But at this time in the universe, the thing that when we poke magnets together or whatever, or look at light or listen to things with Wi-Fi, that became distinct from the fundamental force that deals with things such as smoke detectors or nuclear decay or things of that sort. Before that, we're getting into the GUT era. in which the strong force becomes distinct from all the other forces. The strong nuclear force is basically the gluons inside the proton and neutron that holds quarks together. This is about 10 to the negative 36 seconds. So that means 10.000000036 seconds. Okay.
Yeah, and so for the people at home, these fundamental forces, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are forces that are moving in between two bodies.
Exactly. Yes.
That is the basis of the interaction of these two particles. So the
yes.
gluons, is the gluons the strong force? The one that
Yes.
keeps them together? Yeah. So the
Yes.
gluons, right, coming together make
Mhm.
other subatomic particles.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
As a matter of fact, if you try to isolate a gluon by itself, it turns into a quark. That's another weird phenomenon. You cannot isolate it by itself. Very strange. But yes, you're 100% correct. The electromagnetic force is a medium between charged particles, like electrons and things of that sort. The gluons is a medium between the quarks. Gravity is a force. That's getting into something else.
That's crazy because we're technically exchanging gravitons.
Yes.
That's the idea. We're experiencing gravity on Earth, so we are exchanging gravitons with the planet.
Yes. Now I'm glad you said that word, because that triggered something in my mind that most people don't think about. Now I have to digress because you said gravitons. Freeman Dyson, he just passed away last year. He's one of the people, many people who passed away last year. But I saw a lecture of his that was actually at Nanyang Technological University, which is one of those places where me and my wife go to see lectures. And he said that if there was a detector the size of the Jupiter that were to detect gravitons from the sun, you'd only detect 4 of them every 3 billion years. They're that weak. That's why people. That's why gravitons are somewhat on a theoretical standing. I infer that they exist, but they may not. I highly infer that they do, but that's how weak gravity is in comparison to all other forces. And then there's this notion that gravity may be leaking into higher dimensions, and that's why it's so weak. But that's getting into other things dealing with string theory and things of that sort. But
yeah, when you were talking about quantum tunneling, I wanted to bring that up, the higher dimension thing and how that might be
yes,
affecting the particles that we can see and measure and interact with in our dimension. But we'll get into that.
we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's the GUT era. That's dealing with grand unified theories. Some physicists such as Szabad Hossenfelder think there may not be a such thing as a GUT or grand unified theory. Most do. But I'm just saying that because we have to look at all kinds of hypotheses with that. Then there's the Planck era. This is where things just get weird. The Planck era was 10 to the negative 43 seconds after the Big Bang. Everything before this starts to get highly theoretical. Basically, it's hard to describe because you need quantum gravity just to describe this. And the reason we're having a problem with quantum gravity is because, how do I say this? With relativistic mechanics, you have to have a coordinate system. That coordinate system can be based off of Minkowski space, which is just a flat grid. It can be based off of non-Euclidean geometry, which is something round. De Sitter space, anti-de Sitter space. It has to have a coordinate system to go based off of. And general relativity is basically the notion that matter is telling space-time how to curve, and the curvature of space-time is making matter move. I forget who coined that term.
Say that again. Matter is telling space-time how to curve, And
Mhm.
yeah, I'll let you just say it again. Say it again.
And matter is telling space-time how to curve, and the curvature of space-time is making matter move. Basically, you can do this for people at home. You can do this in bed. Just put your fist down in your sheets. Just put it down. You'll see an indentation, a curvature. And basically, the Einstein field equations quantify that curvature, the space-time fabric is being curved, but the indentions in that curve is how planets go around. This was proven. I can't pronounce this word for the life of me. There's a perihelion. I can't pronounce this word. It's dealing with a phenomenon dealing with Mercury and its orbit. There was an anomalous effect in Mercury's orbit for years that Newtonian mechanics just couldn't compensate for, and it was finally proven with relativistic mechanics uh, that the space-time curvature was also causing certain perturbations or deviations from normal trajectory that made it where it orbits like a kind of like a makes a flower pattern when you have the total sum of various orbits over time. So, but my point with relativistic mechanics was that you need a coordinate system. It doesn't matter if it's Euclidean or non-Euclidean, it has to have some kind of coordinate system. Um, Quantum mechanics is what somewhat people call background independent. Schrodinger, who I haven't touched on that much, um, Schrodinger's equation deals with the wave function of certain particles, and this is quantified um, in his equation. And a lot of people don't like Schrodinger's equation because it's really just dealing with one atom, whereas some people like Dirac's equation better because it's more than just one atom. But Schrodinger's equation is a proper prerequisite for understanding quantum mechanics. And the thing is, quantum mechanics is space-time. How are you going to put a coordinate system that is the coordinate system, if that makes any kind of sense? If the space-time fabric is inherently quantum, and this this goes to the Casimir-Polar force. On the most lowest levels of our reality, there are quantum fluctuations. This goes to the Casimir-Polar force, which was proven experimentally, and this goes to Heisenberg. There's another version of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. I mentioned that there was one dealing with position and momentum. You can't know where it's at and where it's going at the same time. There's also another uncertainty principle equation dealing with energy and time. And this somewhat quantifies the quantum fluctuations that are on the most fundamental levels of our existence. If you were to go way down, it's like a child playing with their milk and they have a straw and just blowing bubbles. It's bubbly and chaotic. It's particles just coming in and out of existence. This is
I think a good visualization for that is it's like a child from another dimension that we can't see, who's playing with their milk, and they're blowing bubbles that are just popping in and out of our universe. So it's like every point in space that is in front of me, around me, has the potential for every kind of matter and energy, or I guess I'll say force, every kind of matter and force. And yeah, I don't know. It's the Dirac hole theory, like kind of deal. That stuff to me is that is amazing.
There's right now in our rooms, there's all kind of invisible fresh neutrinos going through us from the sun and quantum fluctuations. If it's kind of like Geordi LaForge from Star Trek, he has this visor that can see all parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. If we could really see what was going on around us, it probably would be very overwhelming if we could truly see everything that just in our rooms. We have to go in space or anything like that. But the reason the Planck era gets so dicey is because quantum gravity, and this gets into renormalization, quelling infinities, because a lot of infinities come up when you try to combine relativistic equations and quantum mechanical equations. Because with you need relativity because you're dealing with something very big, very dense. This is going beyond c and c equals mc squared or near light speed. Um, and you're also dealing with something very small, so you need quantum mechanics. And the equations just go haywire when we try to quantify what happened around 10 to the negative 43 seconds after the Big Bang, or right at it. And it's just a bunch of infinities start coming up. And a lot of physicists don't think infinities actually exist.
What do you mean by infinity start popping up? Like, what is the integer? If you can even call it infinity an integer, what does that number? What is that quantifying? Infinity. Where are the infinities popping up?
The infinities are popping up when we try to mix equations dealing with, like, not necessarily the wave function, but the quantum state of the universe mixed with relativistic equations dealing with, like, the speed of light, mass, space-time geodesics, the stress energy. I'm talking about things from, like, Einstein field equations, the stress energy tensor, which is kind of like what you were saying earlier about forces going between certain mediums. It just gets to a point when we calculate these things, infinities arise because there's some kind of
Okay. Sorry, I now know what you meant. Because I thought you were saying that the infinities are quantifying something. I remember learning about this. I think it was in a class or something like that. The infinities start popping up in the equations, right? Like we start plugging in infinity into equations to make the equations make sense, right?
Yes.
Gotcha.
It's exactly right. Now, do they actually exist? There's a woman named Sabine Hossenfeld that comes to mind who says no. There's just infinities are just a reflection of human ignorance. Is anything truly infinite? That's kind of you're steering away from science at that point, because science is all about quantifying things. Infinity is not quantifiable at that point. So
yeah.
Now,
Do people argue that infinity is a part of the universe? Like the universe in itself is infinite? Are people extrapolating that from the fact that infinity keeps having to be plugged into these equations for the equations to make sense?
Now, that's kind of that's going in the opposite direction. That's going as to, is the universe infinite in size? Honestly,
but I mean both directions, like in like size and like in directions, but also in like as we look down,
infinitely
right? Like
small.
gluons and forces are not the smallest part of our universe. Like it just keeps infinite in that direction. Is that what they're extrapolating?
Yes, there are physicists who do believe that the universe is infinite. I'm somewhere I used to think that. My wife is totally against the concept of infinity. You find that certain people think it's idiotic, like people, because I'm technically a mathematician, I'm more an experimental physicist. But certain people, like my wife and this other German physicist named Sabine Hossenfeld, think infinities are absolutely stupid because you're not quantifying anything at that point. Is you're really just, when you start saying forever, what does that mean? You can go to, like, for instance, when the universe is 10 to the 10 to the 10 to the 56 years old, that's when it could possibly start over, and I'm going to get into that later. But that's not infinity. That's a huge number. That's a huge exponent, but it's not infinity. So certain people don't like it. I'm somewhere in the middle. They're convincing me more and more that it may be just a thing of human ignorance, but I don't have empirical data to state that it doesn't exist either. So I'm somewhere in the middle as to whether infinity even exists or not. But I had to use infinity when it comes to this time because that's what's causing certain problems. Now, where I come in and other cosmologists come in is we're using the cosmic microwave background and the inhomogeneities and anisotropies to extrapolate the quantum state of the early universe. There are several people. There's Alexander Vilenkin, who thinks that, now I have to get into other things. Alexander Vilenkin is this Russian physicist who believes that our universe came about due to quantum tunneling from prerequisite quantum fluctuations, meaning there were these quantum fluctuations that are here now that have always been here. They tunneled into another state, and that caused the Big Bang. There are other physicists such as Brandenberger. He's dealing with string theory. He thinks that there were strings that predated our universe, and they went into a different state and caused the Big Bang. There's Roger Penrose, who thinks that there was a previous universe that collapsed, and he kind of hears to cyclic cosmology, either collapsed or there were quantum fluctuations from a previous universe that tunneled and made our universe. So there's some people who think that our universe came from another universe. Now, this is not one that I personally endorse, but should be explored. And I'm getting to some dicey territory here with maybe some audience members. And that is the notion that extraterrestrials created the universe. Now, I don't believe this, but I think it should be explored, because people keep saying, okay, and I'm getting into dicey territory here. Is there a God? No, not in the anthropocentric sense. No, there was no man, white guy with a beard, let there be light. Now, was there some kind of extraterrestrials who used pseudo manifold and different vacuum? I'm about to get into vacuum states in a minute here. Different vacuum
pseudo
states
manifold.
to create.
Break that down. What's a pseudo manifold?
Okay. Pseudo manifold, it's kind of hard for me. It's a very abstract object that I don't even know if it exists in real life. But let me back up and see where am I even going with this last one. Okay, there was a paper from Alan Guth, and I didn't even touch on this. The universe at a certain point, I'll say 10 to the negative 10 seconds, inflated. I didn't even touch on cosmic inflation. It inflated exponentially. I don't know if we have to input another particle such as an inflaton to state that that's what caused it, but it did inflate. And Alan Guth is the progenitor of cosmic inflation. It's been proven pretty much with statistical significance with the cosmic microwave background that our universe did inflate. But he also wrote this paper on, can one create a universe in their laboratory? And this goes to a lady named Katie Mack. Katie Mack studies vacuum states. How do I say this? In space is a vacuum, but one has to question, is there a lower vacuum? Is there a vacuum lower than that vacuum? And on a quantum level. And there has been evidence to indicate that there is. And this gets into something kind of scary here. It is very possible. This is dealing with Lagrangian potentials. If you had let's say a Mexican hat at the top, and there's this particle at the top resting, that's our vacuum state. Quantum tunneling or something could make it kick down into a lower vacuum state. If that were to happen, there would be the lower vacuum state would have totally different laws of physics, totally different constants, totally different light, totally different coupling constants for gluons. Everything would be changed, and it would destroy our entire universe. It would be so quick we wouldn't even really feel it or knew it happened. That is a non-zero probability of that happening, of our universe getting kicked into a lower quantum vacuum state. Very low probability, kind of keeps me up at night a little bit, but it's so low it probably won't happen. But it's a scary thought that if it was to get kicked into another vacuum state with quantum tunneling, that could be the end of our entire existence. But that is a prerequisite for this notion of pseudo manifolds and bubble nucleation and certain vacuum states. And that leads me to this notion that, what if extraterrestrials created this universe? Because there's this contentious debate with religious people and atheists and I know I'm gonna get in controversial topic, but with religious people, it's usually like something doing with personal reward or something like that. Atheists, and this is gonna surprise a lot of people, a lot of them are just atheists because of something terrible happening in their life. They're not actually atheists because of like, well, the cosmic microwave background proves this wrong, or the morphological structure of fossils proves evolution, or this, and this. I one time went on Reddit, and I know I shouldn't have done this, but I like to experiment with people. I'm like, did you get into science? Or did you get into atheism because of science? And boy, people were angry at me. They were like, hell no, I didn't get into. Yeah, something happened in my life. Something bad happened. I'm like, okay, well,
It's usually having to do with like authority, like the church having authority violate
it could be
trust or something like that.
it
Is that
could
what
be
you're
that.
referring?
It could be someone died. It could be a woman or a man left them. Financial situations. Most people's thoughts about this existence deals with, if the audience don't take anything away from this, take this away. The fundamental basis of human existence is pain, pleasure, reward, and punishment. And our struggle to go beyond that and understand reality. But the reason I even impute the notion of I don't think extraterrestrials create the universe, but I throw that out there because it's the closest thing I can give people to the notion of something creating it. That's the closest thing we can now. I don't see any evidence for it in the cosmic microwave background. It doesn't appear that that's what has happened. However, it is a non-zero probability that it did. But I'm mainly in the camp of either some type of quantum fluctuations that preceded the Big Bang and quantum tunneling, making it where the Big Bang came from that. Now we're kicking the can down the road and infinitum, because now the question is, where did those quantum fluctuations come from? And I guess that's a job from other future cosmologists to find out. But
Yeah.
that's going backwards. But yeah,
I think that the argument between aliens and God is sort of like it's almost not even an argument because both are undefinable.
yes,
An alien, like it just means not not native to Earth. Like that's all it
yes,
means. Like
that's all it really means.
so and religious people might get mad at this, but like for all we know, the alien is the God. You know what I mean? Or
Exactly.
yeah. But nonetheless, it is an interesting idea, and it's an idea that um a lot of people resonate with. This idea that there's a greater force out there, which I mean, obviously there is. There's
There's a
gravity,
lot
and
of great forces
all
out
these
there.
invisible
Right?
forces, and dark matter is not a force, but to the layman, they would call that like a force that's like
Not
moving
seen,
things
yes.
around us and stuff like that. So it's definitely not off for me. It's not off the table. Yeah, there's just a lot of mysteries of how things are moving back and forth, but I definitely agree with you with we tend to what is that word?
Anthropomorphize.
What's that, say it again?
Anthropomorphize. I had to
Anthropomorphize.
practice that word like 40 times before I even try to say it, but I'm
we
not gonna
tend
even lie, that's a hard word to say.
we tend to anthropomorphize everything, so we try to put like our brain works in story mode.
Yeah,
um and I don't mean like video games, that's a whole other thing. But our brains need stories to
yes.
basically process information. So if we are speculating about something, we put it in this anthropomorphized story mode, like God and stuff like that, and how God is thought about like some kind of man. So yeah.
Yeah, I always thought that was weird, but I mean, I'll say this for me personally. I was raised I was told that growing up, and as a child. Now my brother never believed it. never, even as a child, if we would have to hold hands for prayer, he'd jerk his hand away like, this is creepy. This don't even make sense. And he's saying this as a kid. I'm like, interesting. My wife was like
what
that too.
denomination?
I think certain, huh?
What denomination did you guys grow up?
Okay. There were two, because it's my mother and my father. My father, it was Lutheran. I didn't really mind that one because it was just like, it was just kind of boring. It didn't really, it was innocuous, to just go there, the church, you drink the wine and the little crackers. But my mother was holiness, and that was just scary. I'm not gonna lie, because I know you're from the East Coast. There's in the South. It's another story down here when it comes to religion. I mean, they're rolling in the floor, they passing out, they putting oil on your face. I mean, it's kind of creepy. I'm not gonna lie. I think if I had just been exposed to the denomination of Lutheranism, I still would have been irreligious, but I wouldn't have been so against it. Whereas when you're exposed to holiness, that denomination it's creepy. But it's a thing. But the thing is, it comes from socioeconomic. Lutherans usually have a higher socioeconomic status. My grandfather was a bodyguard for Martin Luther King when he fought in World War II. He had this, on my father's side, this higher socioeconomic status, whereas holiness was for people who had a lower socioeconomic status. So that comes into play here as to how socioeconomics is reflected in religion. But yeah, those were the two denominations I grew up with. Now, what did you grow up with? Any in particular? Or?
Um, I grew up Catholic, and I also seen other things. How could I put this? I guess other non-Christian, indigenous systems of belief, that just different people that I have known and whatever. I don't want to get into that, but yeah, I grew up Catholic, and I've rejected it pretty quickly. As soon as I learned that there was more than one religion,
there's take your pick. There's probably hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, I told my dad at like 9-10 years old, like, wait, I had just learned that there's like thousands of religions, and I was like, wait, Dad, if there's thousands of religions, how do we know that ours is the right one? And I kept getting on him, and he finally like kind of blurted out that like he's that religion because his mother was that religion. So it's not and that's generally what you see like all over the place. It's not this deep contemplation that somebody realizes the truth of the universe.
Yes.
It's usually a cultural or a lineage thing.
Yes.
What is your interpretation of the phenomena that you've seen in the Holy Church? Because this I guess there's like a psychiatric interpretation of that. Some people will just say it's like spirit or whatever. Other people will yeah. What's your
I think I'll go with the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. That is an aspect in which Jonas T. Kaplan et al. At UCLA has said that this part of the brain deals with reward when it comes to religion. Now, every religion has this, but it's stronger in some people than others. Perhaps, just to be honest, I don't know if genetics or diet come into play, because with the Holiness Church, they didn't have as much access to nicer foods, nicer healthcare. So this may have, and I'm inferring here, this may have had an effect on their ventral medial prefrontal cortex as well as their amygdala if they've been through any kind of trauma. And that part of the brain deals with fear or aggression. And I think that had emerged into this behavior in which they would act things out in church. Because a lot of people think it was an immaterial spirit. I don't think so. It was clear the differentiation between Lutheran and holiness is a socioeconomic thing. Lutheranism is directly from Martin Luther, which is directly from Germany. So you can see that that's holiness is really kind of an offshoot of some other um, Pentecostal type denominations going towards that line. But
And that is a trend that you see, the socio-economic trend. Basically, the more poor people are, the more they believe in spooky shit.
yes,
Um,
this is
the more educated and wealthy people are, as a general trend, the less they believe in spooky shit.
well, for the most part, I will say the weird thing about our people is, and I mean, is African Americans, some of us tend to get more religious the better things get for us because things were just so bad at one point. Especially if I have no shame about saying this. I did come from the hood. That gives me a totally different outlook when you come from the hood and you know about Alexander Lincoln and quantum tunneling and vacuum states. That's very weird. It's a very unique experience, but it's one that a lot of people, may not encounter because a lot of the people I encounter come from these nicer uh, places. But me and my wife both came from a place where that wasn't always the case. But with people, if you come from the hood, you know how it is. It's just the condition. It's every man for himself, man, woman, and child for himself. And you get rich, you make a lot of them become more religious after the fact because they think that something saved them. They think that it becomes a thing. That is another weird thing about blessing and curses. It's like once you say that you're blessed, you are aware that you're saying that other people are cursed. Like that's kind of odd to me. But yeah, some people become less religious. Your least religious countries are countries that have the least amount of trauma. Scandinavian countries, Europe, Canada, these are your least religious countries because they have such stable systems. But like you said, the poorest are the most religious because I can't say I 100% blame them. You're stuck in this vessel that is your body and you don't see a way to escape it. So you make up this extra reality just to deal with life. That gets to, well, greed on the top levels, how the anterior cingulate cortex and the amygdala is interdependent with how we are spending our resources. As Tupac once said, we have money for wars but can't feed the poor. I'm not making a moral statement. We do have the money to bring people out of these conditions. A lot of people question the system itself. I question the neurological mechanisms of the people in charge because I feel like this question the system isn't getting us anywhere anymore. So why don't we question the statistical significance of how the amygdala and the anterior cingulate cortex is interdependent with whether people are more egalitarian in nature or more selfish with their money. So the whole notion of just religion being tied to all this it goes back to neurology. Not just neurology. People want to say, well, look at the neurology of the lower people rolling around on the floor in church. But what about the neurology of the people in charge? They're no better than the people rolling around in church. They just had better circumstances. So that's really where I go with that is why don't we have the infrastructure to get these people out of that situation? But yeah, that's
What was your idea of the neurological state, if you will, of the people in charge? I've heard, there's a lot of people say um, that sociopaths run the world. And other people say that it's almost like these positions of power like attract people with a certain like neurological state or psychological state. Um, yeah.
it does. It's
But like,
complicated.
but I mean, before we go to that, like, you touched on, the people who are in charge, their neurological state. Like, what are you thinking about that?
Uh, it's complicated because I'm not a person who's the biggest fan of the Myers-Briggs test, personality test. I think it's a good statistical inference, but it needs a lot of corroboration with neuroimaging. But I'm gonna just use that for now. There's these
Yeah.
16 different personalities.
Hey, you're sorry, your speaker's still kind of like I can hear myself like going
Okay.
in the background.
All right, it's fine now.
Hello? I think it's good now. Yeah.
Okay. There's these 16 different personalities. I hate to have to use this, but I see some statistical significance with it. Um, you have your Barack Obamas, who, and I am in this personality ENFJ, but I don't share. I don't know. I'm a bit more. I'll say a little more misanthropic than Barack Obama, a little more. But you have your Obamas and your Nelson Mandelas and your Martin Luther Kings who literally do just want to, do something better for the world. They just want to help people. You have your Donald Trumps who, not trying to get political here. I know a lot of people watching this might get upset, but you have people like that who just want to manipulate people. That's just what they want to do. Then you have your Hitlers, who was more complicated. It's like he did think what he was doing was right. He was convinced what he was doing was right. It wasn't even a thing where he was manipulating people. He literally thought by divine providence of some kind that what he was doing was right. And then you have the people who are just indifferent. Colin Powell, the more intellectual types. They're just doing their job efficiently. They don't really care about the consequences. They just care about the rules. So my point with that is they're different. Not everyone is a sociopath in powers of in high positions of power. There are a lot of them that are. There are a lot of them that aren't. But I will say the sociopaths are more cunning. It takes, and goes back to this thing about the anterior cingulate cortex. It takes more intelligence to have to shift your way through manipulating people than it does to actually just help them. It doesn't take as much brain power to just help them. It takes more brain power to be manipulative. And that may have a causal effect on other parts of the brain, making them more intelligent in other ways. But we're dealing with intelligence on a social level. Like when it comes to people like me or Heisenberg or Edward Witten or my wife or just I don't think that's the case. We study things that aren't necessarily anthropocentric. People like that are usually a little bit more egalitarian and gregarious. But people who are, like you said, it attracts certain type of people. Where instead of thrown in, like Obama was thrown into that. He didn't necessarily seek it, whereas Trump sought it. He'd been running for president since the year 2000. So it's a differentiation between who seeks it out and people who put those people in that position. And you're right, the people who seek it out usually do it for very nefarious reasons. But this notion that we're going to somehow fix that with the system, I think is very antiquated and obsolete. It's clear we've optimized our cars, our rockets, our smartphones. We're so afraid of optimizing humans, rightfully so, because you're getting into eugenics. You're starting to take away certain traits of people. There's people who have this philosophical notion that individuality trumps everything else when it comes to progress. I don't know if we know that yet. The Chinese somewhat dispute that notion with their homogeneity and their progress in science. But
That's a really interesting thing. Go ahead. That's a really interesting thing.
But I don't know who I don't know. Star Trek somewhat touches, a lot of shows touch on this. Who will win? Will it be diversity or will it be homogeneity or a mixture of the two? Frankly, I think it should be a mixture of the two personally, but there's a battle between the two right now. There's a battle between this notion that there should be as many diverse, and I do think there should be diverse beings. I just think, when does diversity supersede logic? When does the notion that, any and everything should be doing things? There's this guy named Long Beach Griffith. Now, he's a very controversial figure. For me to even utter his name would be egregious to people who are extremely moral, but I think he's he's a comedian, but he's a philosopher at the same time. And he has this skit in which there's this person working at a restaurant, and the waiter is deaf, and the person cooking the meal has no arms. And he's using irony and ridicule to show somewhat poke holes in this logic. Is where does diversity begin to become irrational? Our need to, for these beings to have agency, and that our desire for them to have agency isn't the problem, but we're going. But to what lengths are we going to do that? In the fact, it's to defy logic.
Yeah,
And
go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's interesting that you bring it up because I don't even think we had one conversation before this. I don't think we talked about this, but I've been thinking about this idea that because like America is an experiment, right? This thing about individual freedoms is an experiment, and it's not the norm. And in the history of society, dictatorships, authoritarian states, that's the norm for humanity.
It is.
That is the norm for humanity. And frankly, it's the most I mean, I don't know yet. It seems like it's more efficient, right? So I want to believe that personal freedoms, democracy, and the importance of personal agency is the right thing. That is the thing that's going to win. I want that to be true, but I'm not sure if it's true, right? It seems what might be more effective is this herd mentality. Like in China, this it's not a focus on the individual, it's the focus on the whole and moving the whole forward, and that seems, it seems like we're in this battle right now, and America is this experiment, and we don't know how this is going to turn out. I think it's Switzerland. They're voting right now on a lockdown referendum, so they're going to vote to see what we're going to do for the lockdown. What steps are we going to take for the coronavirus? Well, not we, but for their country. And this is kind of testing just this idea of state power and individual power, and which should have the most power, or should it be some kind of balance? Again, I want to believe that it's individual freedom is the best, right? That's like my ideological predisposition. That's what I want to believe, but it seems like the other one is more efficient to control the world, right? In other words, the country who is more authoritarian may have an edge on the country who is more democratic.
The weird thing is, first we have to admit what freedom, we have to differentiate between freedom and hedonism. Freedom, there's spatial freedom, temporal freedom, and there is cognitive freedom. Now, spatial freedom for humanity would be the Apollo astronauts. They went about 380,000 miles away from the Earth. They had the most spatial freedom out of anyone who has really existed in terms of how many degrees of freedom in space one can have. And then those astronauts had that. However, it took thousands of engineers and women who could sew astronaut suits, and African-American women who need to, abstract algebra and calculus to get them there. So one has to question, is our agent, we don't have independent agency. When I was flying to Singapore, it hit me, I don't have independent agency. My agency is interdependent with the pilot. It's interdependent with United Airlines. It's interdependent with the people before me who use their, we have a collective agency. That's the thing. There is no real individual. If it was just individual agency, we wouldn't be able to go to the moon or fly. And
Well,
then
I
there's
think there's individual agency, but our individual agency, like neurologically speaking,
Mhm,
has been evolved to favor the group. Because
mhm,
if you, for instance, if you're in a genetic group that you guys worked better together, then you guys are gonna pass your genes on. And the people
yes.
who weren't able to cooperate, right? Who were, in other words, the people who weren't able to um, align their individual agenda with the collective agenda, they're gonna die out, you know, which kind of touches on the thing you're talking about diversity. Um, maybe you didn't go there, but um, when you have a diverse nation such as the United States, you're gonna have everybody's gonna be on a different page. And I think that's part of what we're seeing right now, right? Like we're not on the same page. So our notions of individual or our individual agendas are not in alignment with the collective agenda. So that, you know, that again goes back to that question of um, is this egalitarian focus on diversity? Is this the most efficient thing, right? And this is not a moral thing that I'm saying. What I'm saying is a matter of life and death, of, you know, of what nation is going to survive, you know. Um, and I don't think we know the answer to that yet. And I think that
Mhm.
right now the world is an experiment. You know, the United States is this diverse place that I want the United States to win because, again, it's this experiment. Whereas places like Russia, China, um, Japan, they're more homogeneous. So yeah, I wonder
The
what's
weird,
gonna.
the weird thing is, and I'll touch on temporal and freedoms in a minute, but to touch on what you just said, do you remember the 90s very well?
I mean, I was born in '94, so
Okay.
not really.
Back back then, this is what's so weird about what's happening now in America is fairly recent. It wasn't always this bad. We were going towards something as a somewhat, it was an interesting experiment. We all were individuals, but we were all going towards this certain goal. Um, but I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't always this bad. Things getting like the way it is now, it's been building up since about 2014. Before that, we had some problems in our society, but it wasn't a thing where we had mass shootings, protests, burning things down, people storming the Capitol, people storming Washington. It was not this bad. Now, it kind of got like that in the 60s, but 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and the early 2010s, that wasn't really the case. As a matter of fact, growing up in the 2000s after 9/11, frankly, when I remember that time period, I remember Destiny's Child Emotions was out, Ja Rule was out, 106 in Park, all that was out. I remember that time period like it was yesterday. Everybody was together back then when that happened. But what happened now, just to be honest, are tribalism. What really set this all off was Trayvon Martin. After that point, after Obama had kind of said he could have been my son, that, and I'm not saying that he was wrong for right or wrong for saying that. I'm not, I know people are gonna make trying to twist my words. And I am in no way right wing or left wing. I'm just saying that that was the causal event in which Black Lives Matter started, Blue Lives Matter started. Now, granted, the Tea
I
Party
disagree.
started
I
before
disagree.
that.
I disagree. I think what happened was the internet and
Now,
uh,
you're now. I think
video
you
technology
are
and the
right. I'm not
internet is
gonna
what
deny
happened.
that.
I think there was a lot of inequality, obviously racial inequality, and I think that our society found mechanisms to kind of cover up the inequality and the injustices. And then with the technology of communications leveling up, I think that really magnified everything.
No, you're 100% correct.
Um,
You're
and
right.
I,
The
I was
internet
just looking for
did.
this. I was just looking for this quote. That I think it was Abraham Lincoln, um,
Mhm.
basically saying that Africans being in America is a problem because, like, basically the population is going to grow, and then there's going to be a difference in agenda. Um, and I like when I first heard what Abraham Lincoln said, it's like, okay, so Abraham Lincoln is not as good as everybody. He was a racist. Um, there was political reasons for him, quote unquote, freeing the slaves. Um, but yeah, I kind of forgot where I was going with that.
Well, you're right. It was the internet, and you are right about the different agendas because we are approaching two events.
Oh
Don't
yeah,
want to
sorry.
scare people, but
Where I was going with that is just
Mhm.
that when you have different populations, you're gonna have different agendas, especially
Yes.
when there's inequality in between those groups of people. And a lot of the founding fathers, spoke on that. And um, I almost think that there's like a hidden hive-like um, mentality that humans have, and it's innate
Yes.
within us. And whenever there is an other, like this is probably like some kind of crazy genetic program that's in us, that whenever there's another, we attack the other.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, that just goes back to my question. Again, it's not a moral question. It's just a question of efficiency and dominance as far as like what's going to dominate the planet. Um, does You could say biological systems or social systems, how we organize ourselves as humans, which wins, the diverse egalitarian one or the other one?
As for which one will win will depend on there are two events. It's complicated. I'm gonna say two events that's gonna determine that. There are two events coming up that is gonna greatly change our society. The first one is obviously artificial intelligence. Now Asia is moving way faster than that. If you even When I even went to Asia, I will say this: it looks like they're about 20 years ahead of America. You can just see that in their society. Um, the thing about here, though, this according to the U.S. Census, by 2040, um, the European man will not be the majority in this country anymore. By about 2040, as a collective between African Americans, Indian Americans, Mexican Americans, and East Asian Americans, as a collective, will outnumber European Americans in this country. They can see this coming. I've traveled across this whole continent to the United States. You can see it. They are the majority now, but it's shrinking. And their tribalism is kicking in. Now, I have nothing against white people. In particular, I understand that the media is kind of like really against them right now, especially white men. Me, I am not anthropocentric. I think that all humans are going to evolve into something else anyway. But there has, as to whether we're going to be able to coexist, it's. I'm being honest. There's so many obvious things that could happen here. I mean, one, they should go to fertility clinics. If they're worried about their population, they should focus more on that than trying to kill other beings. Another thing is a lot of these other races are a lot more fertile. Um, Another thing people need
But
to
I think
wonder
it's
about is
complicated because it becomes a competition of because let's say that these white people that don't want to be erased in this country, they stop trying to lower the numbers of other races in this country, and they just focus on growing theirs. But it just becomes a competition because everybody else is gonna try to do the same thing. And I would argue against the idea that it's simply tribalism. I think sometimes tribalism becomes like a scapegoat. I think that racism is not some abstract social
Oh,
thing that happens. I think that racism is it's like fundamental to biology, fundamental
yeah,
to
yes,
the
yeah,
human
yes, you're
biology
right.
that we are, right? Um, and I mean, I have a lot of, I guess you could say, like I guess pro-black ideas, but kind of not really, because I mean, you see me, I'm dark-skinned male, but
Mm.
I'm mixed race of every race on the planet. Um, but racism, yeah, let me go back to just saying that racism is fundamental because it's this biological drive for a homogeneous group to pass on their genes. That's racism, period. I feel like a lot of people make racism more complicated and try to make it more abstract and spookier than it is, but that's simply what it is.
Well,
Is this people are competing with each other, and yeah.
don't only thing I'll say, well, I'll say this on a neurological level. Neurologically, racism is really an emergent property of the amygdala. Uh, they've done various, and you know it's crazy. Even black people are more racist towards darker people. That's even weirder. But um, it's really just the thing is to fear and the amygdala. Now, as to, I won't lie, I don't have any. I'm not pro any particular race. Well, let me back up because the thing is, people are forgetting about allopatric speciation and genetic diversity. Um, when you mate with someone, and I'm not promoting this, I'm just stating a genetic fact. When you mate with someone who has more genetic diversities, let's say I have a nephew, he's mixed. He's black, he's white. And when you do that, you limit the amount of homozygosity, which eliminates certain deleterious traits and genes. And actually, mixing as a rate, as you know, as a species, it's kind of weird. On the one hand, it will build our genetic strength in terms of genetic diversity. The more diverse genes you have, the more you can ward off a lot of cancerous things and a lot of genetic defects. However,
Yeah, which is the problem with inbreeding. Like
yes, that's why
there's
inbreeding causes
there's
what it calls.
there's
However,
a
it gets
stereotype of like white Americans in the South inbreeding, and which is very true. Like
I've
that
seen
happens,
it. It
and
it
but
is
also in royal
true.
families, and like the British royal families,
Yes,
the
Spanish
ancient
royal family too.
Egyptian,
Yes,
lots of diseases. There's some Jewish populations that have been affected by this, where there's a lot more diseases and stuff like that.
yes. Genetic diversity is very important. However, once we get into millions of years into the future, it backfires on us. I forget the name of this. It starts for P, but it's a Paxan. I forget the name of it, but that's when if we everybody on the planet just mates with each other. Yeah, we'll be genetically strong in the next few thousand years, but millions of years we'll become completely homogeneous. The permutational and combinatorial aspects of the ACTG sequence have been worn out. So millions of years from now, at least with beings on this planet, it will start to somewhat go against us unless we evolve into a separate being completely.
Why
And
would
I
it go
think
against us?
we'll be completely homogeneous. I mean, there's only a finite, and this is only if humans remained on Earth.
But
And
what's wrong with that?
we all become a homogeneous thing, and there's no genetic diversity more. Like, think of it like this, like,
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I get what you're saying now.
I'm speaking millions of years. For now,
Yeah,
it would be best for us to do it. But in millions of years, if we only stayed on this planet, it would eventually go against us millions of years in the future. This is why we need to go to other planets and have different kinds of humans in different kinds of environments. Now, there will be a certain speciation in which where they wouldn't be able to mate at a certain point because they get too diverse. But this is kind of what humans need to, or this is probably why China is working on CRISPR. We may be able to keep, like, if you want people to remain African and want people to remain white, they can keep that, but through CRISPR. This may be why China is working so hard on CRISPR, because they are so homogeneous and they know that their population will start to have inbreeding problems. With it being that homogeneous, maybe that's why they're working so hard on CRISPR-Cas9 or adeno-associated viruses. So
and I
this is
think a study came out about and it's funny because I was asking this question when coronavirus first started. Like I was like, I wonder if the fact that they're homogeneous allows the virus to move through the population faster than a more diverse population. Yeah, I'll look that up later, and if it's true, then I'll put it in there. But yeah, so, sorry for interrupting. What were you saying?
But yeah, as for this experiment that is America, and you're asking, I haven't really answered your question. What a win!
I mean, it's not really a question for you. It's just a curiosity I have about how we organize ourselves as humans.
I think
I'm not
diversity.
sure if any of us have an answer yet.
I think diverse. It's not a. It's not a thing that diversity can't be done. Okay, here's my thing about all this. And this is where I differ from a lot of people on this issue. I think there is a fundamental neurological thing that's going to have to change, because we're going to be giving, it's going to be like giving nuclear weapons to a bunch of kids, with people with the mind of children. I wholeheartedly think that we're going to have to genetically or cybernetically alter ourselves to keep up, not only to keep up with artificial intelligence, but to coexist. I know that a lot of people, because I get all kind of reactions from this, even from other scientists. You'd be surprised. Even other scientists are very steadfast. Now, they're not against CRISPR, they're not against cybernetics, but in the way that I'm speaking of it, they are more against it. And I think it's dealing with more fear than actual logical reasons. But
Yeah,
if
I
you
don't
look
think
at,
we're gonna have to go to cybernetics and CRISPR. I think we are going to, period,
yes, it's
because
inevitable.
whatever your opinion on it is, right? If it's good or bad, humans, we will do whatever to get ahead of another group of
Yes,
humans, right?
yes,
We will do the worst things in the world. So your opinion of whether genetic engineering, or specifically genetic engineering on humans, and cybernetics and morphing with AI, your opinions of on that, not you as the person, but people, the opinion is it doesn't matter, because once, let's say, a family, let's go into like a subculture, a microcosm, this family, a wealthy family, right? They have a kid, and they know that they could merge their kid with AI in some kind of way, or they can genetically engineer their kid so that their kid has a better chance in the world, right? They're gonna do that. So
yes,
it's it's not gonna be it's not even a social thing. It's like a biological thing of like, we're gonna do the things that we need to do to get ahead as whether it's a family unit, a tribal unit, or a racial or national unit. It's just gonna happen.
yes.
We have no decision on that. This is like an evolutionary process that's gonna happen.
Well, there's a such thing as neo-Luddites. And this, especially after what happened at the Capitol, I do see this coming. And this is kind of why, and people may wonder, and I never really addressed this because people may be watching this wonder, well, he's studying quantum cosmology, but he's kind of dressed kind of militaristic. Is well, why? Well, because of something that is coming up. And it's not for National Socialism or Black Panthers or any of that. It's literally a defense of science because there are going to be people who will fight against this wholeheartedly for various reasons. Neo-Ludditism is going to come because there's people who believe the human race is sacred. They don't think that they think the human race is separate from everything else in existence.
Yeah, or
They don't want to compare
the current human condition is viewed as
the
this
current.
thing.
Yes.
Where we are right now. It's like, oh,
Yes,
we don't want to change where we are right now. Yeah.
Yes, they think it's distinct from everything else in existence. And you're dealing with people who don't even think that we're material beings. They think that we're immaterial beings inside of a material. And when you get that kind of irrational thought, it's going to lead to unprofound violence against science. This is something I really want, besides quantum cosmology, that is the main thing I'm passionate about. The second thing that I'm mainly concerned about is the safety of scientists. I do think that in the near future, that's going to be an issue for a lot of reasons. One, we're creating artificial intelligence to take away jobs from people. Like if you have a college degree in something, this is why I'm working. I talk to a lot of truck drivers because I'd be at truck stops reading, my SAT, GRE, even O levels. I don't have to take the O levels. That's for the United Kingdom, but I study it anyway just to know the way other countries study things. And people with truck stops will be like, you're a truck for you already make good money. I'm like, this is gonna be replaced in like 2027 to 2030. And the very idea of that, I can see in their face makes them almost want to cry or be violent because they're like, I don't want to get a college education. I don't want to do any of that. I just want to stay at where I'm at. Why are you people forcing me to have to learn more? And frankly, I don't mind being forced to have to learn more, but these are more feeble-minded people who don't want to do that. And when their job is replaced and you're putting them in a situation, now we need to make a situation, if you want to say politically, where we make college free, or we make it where it's more accessible to people so they can optimize themselves. But there's going to still be some who don't want to, and they are going to target scientists. I don't doubt this. This has already kind of started under Trump. There's a lot of people who do not trust science, who do not like science, because they feel as though it is pushing them away from their utopia, which is based on the notion that they should not experience any punishment or pain, or if they do, it should be under the circumstances of of a naturalism bias, not one in which human beings have enforced it upon them. And this is kind of why, why would someone studying quantum cosmology wear this stuff? Why would they take a militaristic stance? Doesn't make sense. Most people in the academic world are liberal and very docile, but I take this stance because I wholeheartedly think that there's going to be a war against scientists, Black, white, Latin, or whatever. This is not a racial thing. If you're a person who's going to college and you're in a laboratory, you're manipulating AI to do things, I do think that these people will be targeted by people who have no desire or will to do that. And the Luddites have been a thing in previous industrial revolutions. The cotton gin and various industrial things that made it where slaves were no longer needed were destroyed by Luddites. So that's things like this happened in the United Kingdom.
Oh, wow, really?
Where machines were destroyed. And I don't doubt this. Now, I don't doubt, that a lot of people don't see this. And because a lot of other scientists are liberal. I don't have a problem with that. I get that they mean well, that they want to help. You know, a lot of them put their pronouns on their profile, they, them, he, her, she. You know, I'm not. You know, I get it. A lot of academics are more. You know, a lot of them are just. You know more about reality, and you don't want to. Just inflict torture on people. There are some physicists like that, but most of the academic world is very liberal. But they don't understand that they are exposed to getting conquered. And we're going to have to set up a possible paramilitaristic unit to defend ourselves. A lot of people are.
You really think it's gonna get to that? I mean, yeah. I mean, like you could look at, I guess, China. You look at
Mhm.
the the revolution they had. I mean, what I'm about to say, I'm not saying it because I'm anti or pro communist, but
Mhm.
when you look at communist revolutions, they
Mhm.
target the intellectuals. You know,
Yes.
they actively kill and hunt down the intellectuals because they believe that the intellectual class is upholding the economic system that
Yeah, communism, fascism, allegories, religious, all of them target intellectuals. Adolf
yeah,
Hitler, he didn't mind intellectuals who were making bombs for him, but he did target other ones that were Jewish. Communist movements target intellectuals. Donald Trump has targeted intellectuals. There are people who are on the left and the right. People, because the left, people don't remember, have been pushing anti-vax stuff, vaccine stuff for years, and the right is pushing all other kinds of conspiracies. So my thing is, and this, I know I get that a lot of people like, this is dangerous what you're talking about. You're talking about, a lot of people are gonna try to harm you for this, but I wholeheartedly think that scientists of all races, doesn't matter if you're gay or straight or black or white, Latin, what your beliefs are. You're a person who is a physicist, chemist, biologist. You're working with AI. You're educated. You took your MCATs. You took your GRE. You have a stable, somewhat stable life. You still have a job, but there are people out there who either work in coal, what's another job? Retail, Burger King, all this is going to be automated. And you're going to be we're putting millions of people out of work. And it's a survival of the fittest thing, but they're not going to go blindly and just say, okay, I'm just going to go die now. That's not what they're going to do.
yeah.
They're
But I
going
guess
to,
that's where universal income, universal basic income comes
UBI
in.
will work with the left, but it would not work with the right because they
Yeah. So,
have,
and a lot of these working people are on the right side of things. But
yes.
I think that the coronavirus situation was almost a litmus test for that. Um,
Yes.
I think a lot of more people would, especially because it was actually a perfect storm if you really think about it, because Donald Trump was the one that gave people free money. So
Yeah.
it's probably altered people who are more conservative leaning and like anti-socialist, anti-communist, probably like, okay, maybe this is necessary. But I, I want to point out a flaw in what I think you're saying right now. When fascist and communist regimes kill the intellectuals, it's because they think that the intellectuals are not really impartial and unbiased, which is what a lot of whether you talk about the hippies on the left or the, I guess, the more religious right, that these people are quote unquote anti-science. Um, they themselves wouldn't label themselves anti-science, but they think that the science has been tainted by the institutions and the socioeconomic backdrop of our society, aka capitalism, or take your pick, however you want to describe it. They think that that has contaminated the intellectuals, right? Which is why
They're
they're
not
killed.
entirely wrong about that.
So yeah, and that's exactly my point. My point is that there is a truth in that. So when you are calling for a militarization of scientists, I think that it's basically calling for a militarization of another um, group that is also guilty of anthropomorphizing.
You're
Um,
not wrong.
we can't.
It's a thing as to whether the ends justify the means at this point. But you're not. No, I 100% concur. I don't concur with the notion that we shouldn't militarize it, but I concur with the notion that scientists have biases. They do. Even
Yeah,
the people I've talked to, yes, scientists do have bias. This goes into cybernetics, and
yeah,
that's
and I guess this speaks to uh, the I guess the problem of um the intellectual community being very liberal. Or there's a quote that says, I want to pull it up. It's like when the intellectuals, um hold on, when soldiers, basically, I don't remember how it goes, but the basis of the quote is that we're going to be in a very bad place when soldiers are not intellectuals and intellectuals are not soldiers.
100% correct. I feel like
So
I need to
if
steal that
if
from you.
so what I would more argue for, which would be more of like an individualistic rights kind of thing, is for scientists to be more um physically and combatively ready and fit, rather than a organization of it. Like
I wish that I don't have anything against. I wish that were the case. It's
yeah, because
just when
again, this is
people
this is
move in
probably my bias,
mobs.
because I tend to think that individual liberty and decentralized modes of organizing ourselves is better, versus
I don't. I would go as
versus
far to say perhaps.
like a big group of like, let's take arms and protect science. Because I think that when you have the collective agenda, is it's way more fraught with biases.
It
um
it
Again, this is
is.
this is more my ideology. This is what I think, and this is what I want to be true, probably because I have an innate fear of, kind of like what you were saying earlier, of being dominated by other, or being oppressed by other more powerful groups, and in
I
ways
don't.
that happen in Russia and China,
Mhm.
and um, every age and like every era and every place around the world, basically.
I don't disagree at all with what you just said. It's just that what you're talking about. I think they're both needed. And that honestly, I actually learned something. I usually don't in a lot of conversations I have with some people these days, but I learned something from what you just said. And it's interesting. But I will kind of say that they're both needed in the sense that yes, you're right. There does need to be an individual accountability of defending yourself. But that's getting more into the realms of asymmetrical warfare. That's a lot more complicated, but I'd say needed more than what I'm talking about. Now, as for everybody being in lockstep defending science, the reason I don't know, no, I do think people's individuality is needed. If I wouldn't want to quash that because I think that's what makes people stronger. The only thing is, my thing is this is a survival thing. It's not a thing where I think everybody has to think the same. It's just that the other side is. I do infer that the other side will come to a conclusion that all scientists are, like you said, biased or corrupt and want to end our life. In those situations, I think it will have to be both. I concur. There is going to have to be an individualistic notion of how a person should go about what you're talking about, asymmetrical warfare, in which they are defending themselves in their own individual research. I concur with that. I don't think most situations would be lockstep, like way I'm talking about, where it's a group versus a group, but there will be certain situations in which there are. There will be people storming laboratories, storming AI research centers and things of that sort. So we would have to move in a little bit more coordination. And another thing is, I don't, and this is where it gets dangerous, I don't think scientists, the very thing that makes scientists biased is nationalism or allegiance to a nation. Another thing is, a lot of scientists have to pledge allegiance to their nation before science itself. And that is also something that hinders research. Now, that's been something that's been proven to hinder research even in the 30s and 40s. Imagine if Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg could have actually worked together if Hitler didn't do what he was doing. So, but now we're getting into a dangerous realm here. I understand that, what I'm saying becomes dangerous now because nations are saying, wait a minute, this guy's talking about getting all the scientists together away from our nations, becoming a collective unit. And that's even more dangerous because dealing with individual anarcho groups and neo-Luddites is dangerous enough. Dealing with governments and actual bureaucratic entities that need scientists for their agenda is even more dangerous. But it would also at the same time free us from the biases that the neo-Luddites perceive us to have. Now, I don't really personally have any sociological biases. I'll admit, my only biases are things like certain like phenomenon in physics I've already been predisposed to. So it's like a Gödel's incompleteness theorem thing. It's like what Donald Rumsfeld once said: "Yes, known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns." Don't know what I don't know. So I have biases towards information that I already know in a philosophical or its epistemological sense. But as for sociological biases, I have none whatsoever because I don't have a certain group I've ever been loyal to. I've never been loyal to a white supremacist group, a black nationalist group, an Islamic group. I've never been part of a group, period. So I think the notion of people being favored by groups makes it where they feel they have to have allegiance to them. The only thing I've ever had allegiance to is science itself. So, you're not going to catch, that's why even my page, you're not going to catch me getting in trouble over something like what people say, fat shaming, or you're going against white people, you're going against black people. You look at my page, every single race, every single type of person has been posted. You don't see that on a lot of pages. A lot of people just post black scientists, they just post white scientists, they just post trans scientists. So you're right, there are biases, but these biases are dealing with groups outside science. And I just am weary about the next few years because there's a lot of jobs that are going to be taken away. And not just that, Trump has made it where people don't like science. They don't trust it. And it's clear that they're going to have some kind of violence against that. And the reason I want this to be protected goes back to quantum cosmology or even chemistry. We've come too far to let these institutions be destroyed. It's like the myth of Alexandria. I don't know if that's a myth or not, but the Library of Alexandria or Babylonia, one of those places that got burnt down, it had all these books in it. We could be approaching an age in which that could happen again. We have to relearn Planck's constant, relearn the Riemann hypothesis, relearn Goldbach's conjecture, relearn Schrodinger's equation all over again with different namesakes because of neo-Luddites. And I don't think enough scientists are taking this seriously. I really don't. I think it's something, I get that people don't want to be in lockstep, because to be in lockstep with a bunch of people is anti-intellectual in nature.
Yeah, it's anti-scientific.
It really is. It's somewhat anti-intellectual. But I think that will be somewhat intellectuals undoing in not having at least some coordination because the other side does.
Yeah, Yeah.
And I get it. I get it. I don't think my wife is too big on some of these ideas because I'm going to be honest, she's more of an intellectual than I am. I'm more of a cross between militarism and intellectualism. She's a pure intellectual, and pure intellectuals want nothing to do with this brutish nonsense. However, the other side does. And that's where a lot of intellectuals are gravely mistaken. But um, I guess we'll see how that plays out in the 2040s or the 2030s.
Well, it's damn, man. You know, we had a repeat of basically the end of the 19 teens, right? So
Yes.
we had a pandemic. So
Yeah. I see where you're
that
going with this. It's
I
not
hope
looking
that
good
we're
at
not going to
all.
get a repeat of the 30s and the 40s.
Um,
And I would say that it seems like that's where, well, nah, the 30s and the 40s, that there was a lot of national, like nations fighting against each other. Where now I think that there is, I would argue, probably equally distributed in most developed nations, that there is this there is these battles, and it's almost like
yes.
everywhere it's the same. And yeah, I don't know. I like the idea of some kind of international scientific union, which is, kind of already exists, and we're moving towards um an international culture, which is, yeah, it's I can't even imagine how the fact that we have the ability to communicate and to engage in trade with everybody on the entire planet. um I Yeah, I really wonder what that's gonna be like, because like if you really think about it, like I'm from the Dominican Republic. So
Ah,
my culture, it was shaped um out of all the interactions that happened from the 1700s, up until now, right? Which is a very microcosmic, or like a small community, right, in comparison to how cultures are being evolved now, right? So what evolved the Dominican culture? It was, some French culture, some Spanish culture, some indigenous culture, some African culture, um, and then the backdrop of the ecology of the place. But now culture is being developed in such a, basically, that we're not just evolving individual cultures the way we used to.
oh no.
And yeah, I wonder how that would affect the course of events, as far as repeating the 1930s and the 1940s.
It is the globalism, and that's a dirty word now to some people. Is I mean,
Yeah, it is.
my wife's from Singapore. I mean, I've traveled all over the world. I've been to Montreal, Canada, Singapore, Germany. I mean, it's so easy to do it. I'm not even rich. I think that was a thing back in the day. It was only wealthy people could travel around. Now you don't have to be wealthy to travel around the world if you really want to do it. And globalism has it's kind of made it where the pandemic has gotten worse in some instances, but it's made it where ideas have made people closer together rather than just situational circumstances in
Mhm.
certain countries. Now you can find someone based on ideas, um, in contrast to just where you live. As a matter of fact, where I live, like I'm sure it's different on the East Coast, but in Alabama, there are no discussions like the one we're having. Not to just shit on all Alabamians, but it's just without the notion of the internet and globalism, I'd be very much trapped in an area, and I wouldn't even know who I'd really am. And I'm sure that's the way it was for centuries with people who had ideas but couldn't really express them because they were being suppressed either by their own group or other groups. So the fact that globalism is making it where ideas are superseding just community, it's gonna make this, whatever happens in the 30s and 40s, the 2030s, 2040s, very asymmetrical. I don't think it's gonna be as like playing chess or anything like it was in the 30s and 1930s and 1940s. It's gonna be very asymmetrical. It's gonna be a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
But
On one hand, the government structures are stronger. Like in other words, the nations are stronger as opposed to any small groups within the nation, because technologically the our country is superior to any kind of organizing group within the country.
that's
Um,
true.
but the organizing capacity of the communications networks we've had, aka the internet, that might, like you're saying, make it more asymmetrical.
Asymmetrical.
It would make it more asymmetrical because, like, it's not just, I mean, in the mid 1900s, you had Che Guevara. He linked up with Fidel Castro. So you did have these people that had similar ideologies that were able to organize and link up and grow. But that, as compared to now, the ability for communications is astronomical. And I was actually watching this video. It was a Vice video. It's about how the white supremacists in America kind of got splintered into a million pieces after the Charlottesville protest.
Hmm.
And a lot, even right now, it's happening where a lot of these white nationalist groups are being deplatformed. And some, obviously, I think a lot of mistakes are being made where white nationalist adjacent groups are also being deplatformed, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But what the dude, he was a white nationalist. I think it was Richard Spencer. What he was saying is that, no, it wasn't Richard Spencer. It was another quote unquote leader in the white nationalist community. He was saying that what they need to get right now or reestablish is communications, because that's like what you need in a war. That's like one of the like really important tenets of fighting a successful war, is to have the communications. And right now there is a drive to throw off the communication so that there's less of an organizing factor.
It's
Um,
odd you said this. I
but
guess I'll
can
touch on this.
you actually hold that thought? I need to run to the
Mhm.
back real quick.
Sure.
All right, I'm back. Yeah, you were saying, I forgot what you were saying.
Okay. It's odd. I'll say this and then I'll try to wrap it up towards the universe again. um, It's odd you brought this up about communications and right-wing people. Had a debate with a guy not too long ago about this. I'm like, had you guys studied computer science, you wouldn't be in this mess, because they are in a situation where with Parler and a lot of their communications are being cut. The lines are being cut with them. And as you said, uh, it seems like a good idea at first. I don't know. I'm on the fence with it, because you start to get to a point. Okay, where does it end? You get into a rabbit hole, but that's another conversation. But the thing is, a lot of these people don't tend to study computer science. Once again, that tends to be something in America that liberals usually do. They usually go towards. Now in Russia, that's not the case. In Russia, doesn't matter what political spectrum, they'll use their computers to hack people and all kind of stuff. But even people here on the left, usually hackers are usually on the left. It's not really a right wing thing, and that does worry me that because these people can't communicate on the internet, how extreme they're going to get to try to communicate elsewhere. But I had a conversation with a guy on the right about this, and he just couldn't get it. I'm like, you really need to be studying this instead of arguing with me here on Instagram about this. And because I'm like, I'm not, even a lot of people on the left, like, why would you tell him to go study computer science? I'm like, it's not that I want the right to win. I really don't. But I'm making a point here. He could have been getting studying the ACT, the SAT, or whatever, O level, probably not the O levels for him because he's American. Could have been doing that instead of debating me on Instagram about this. And their whole notions are that they have this abstract notion that big tech should not suppress them, but they can, and they will. And it's weird that there are people who believe in these abstract concepts, and then when they see the actual factual physical reality proves these abstract concepts wrong, they have a fit. So it's just kind of
What
strange.
abstract concepts are around that you're saying?
That the notion of liberty and freedom, and they're masquerading hedonism as liberty and freedom. That's something I didn't finish touching on earlier when it comes to what freedom and liberty is. I touched on spatial freedom with the Apollo mission. Temporal freedom would merely be us living longer, unless you want to get into relativistic stuff. And then cognitive freedom, being able to think what we want without hindrance. And a lot of people talk about freedom and liberty, but if the whole notion is that you want to think what you want to do what you want, why do you choose to do the things that you do? Well, if you want to think whatever you want in the universe, why just read the Bible and the Constitution? Or why just read Karl Marx and other manifestos? If you want to know whatever you want, if you want freedom temporally, why do you eat what you eat? Why do you eat so unhealthy? You're going to limit your temporal freedom. If you want to go other places, why do you just stay in one country? If you want to think what you think, why do you only go on certain websites? I don't think that people are looking for liberty or freedom. They're looking for hedonism. And the fact that we masquerade hedonism as liberty and freedom is the most egregious thing to that word, because literal freedom isn't actually being achieved on a temporal, spatial, or cognitive level. And that's what I mean by these abstract concepts. Like we're masquerading. Even when you go to Pennsylvania, their thing is the pursuit of happiness. Right when you go into Pennsylvania, you see that, and we as a country just keep confusing how much pleasure we get with how much freedom we have. Freedom doesn't necessarily always equate to pleasure. I've been in 2019, I was spatially free. I could go wherever in the world I wanted, but it was stressful. It wasn't always pleasurable getting on planes and going wherever I wanted in a truck or whatever. But I could go to wherever I really wanted in the continental United States or Asia or Europe, and Canada and Mexico. But it wasn't always pleasurable. So I'm free spatially, but it's a lot of hard work that went into it. And that's what I don't get why people, well, I get it, but it's just weird and contradictory that people masquerade hedonism as literal spatial, temporal, and cognitive freedom when they don't.
That's really interesting. I've never really thought about that. Um, because like when you think about what freedom really is and what freedom really takes, it's not free. That cliche of freedom isn't free. It's so true. Like freedom requires, you almost have to, in order for you to fight to become free, you almost have to become a slave to some
Exactly.
kind of regiment.
Some other system. Yeah.
Yeah, some kind of regiment, right? So like if you want to be financially free, you basically have to become a slave to organizing your finances, right? Working
Yeah.
long hours, or working on this technology, or organizing this thing, right? If you want the freedom that comes with health, that takes you being locked in.
Mhm.
In this conflation between hedonism and freedom. Yeah, wow, like I've never really thought about it, because it doesn't, I guess, like it's, maybe it's the question of instant gratification versus delayed gratification. So instant gratification would be hedonism, whereas delayed gratification would be, um eh, we would have to in some way get together as a group, which in its essence is giving up personal agency, so that we
Yes.
can really extend our freedoms, which is, like you said, cognitive, temporal, and I forgot what the other one was, but just freedom in general. um yeah, and I guess that's the um what's the word, the word starts with a D. It's like when someone's in a conflict. That's the
Cognitive dissonance.
not the dissonance. Well, whatever. I'll just describe it. So America, it's the land of the free, so they say. And there's all these individual rights, and there's a lot of it is objectively true. But in order for us to remain a place where individual liberties are exercised and are important, there needs to be a level of groupthink in order for us to organize ourselves in a certain way to fight wars, or to, which, fighting wars, you could say, is a euphemism for acquiring resources from other places, and
Yeah.
stabilizing the stability of our empire, because we live in an empire. America is an empire,
Yes,
and a
Pax
lot of
Americana.
do
Yes.
are to stabilize. When we have all these bases across the world, a lot of people criticize it, right? Which, yeah, I get why you're criticizing it, but at the end of the day, what we're doing is, we are a very big empire, and if we don't infiltrate all these countries in all the dirty, nasty ways that we do, we won't have a nation anymore. But my point was that we have to basically, in order for us to retain our freedom to do certain things and to believe certain things, we need to fall into some kind of propaganda so that we could organize ourselves. Um, Dichotomy was the word I was looking for.
Dichotomy.
Yeah. So it's this dichotomy of, and I guess we touched on this a little bit earlier, the dichotomy of individual rights and a collectivism.
Yes.
Uh,
Lastly, because of other things, I will touch on this with the universe. Try to speed this up, basically. And I don't want to leave the audience hopeless, so I'll leave with something nice towards the end. Basically, and where the universe is going as to what we know now, the sun is a yellow dwarf. It's going to expand to a red giant sun, probably engulf the Earth and turn into a nebula. The Andromeda Galaxy, this is about 3 billion years from now. In about 6 billion years, the Andromeda Galaxy will collide with the Milky Way galaxy, and it will no longer be blue. It will be a big yellow galaxy in the sky. It look like the sun, except much bigger at night. 6 billion years from now, about pretty much in about 200 billion years, all the galaxies that are outside of our local group of galaxies, we won't be able to see them anymore. And then when you get into trillions of years from now, the cosmic microwave background won't be visible anymore. You get into exponents like 10 to the 10 to the 21 years. We get into black holes being the last things in the universe, because all the stars have used quantum tunneling to become really nothing or a liquid. All the planets and solid objects will become more of a liquid due to quantum tunneling in these far ages. Then after that, due to the quantum fluctuations we discussed earlier, it's going to be the black holes are going to evaporate because because of the conservation of energy or whatever. Once a black hole absorbs a part of the quantum fluctuation, that energy has to go somewhere, so part of it evaporates. So then after the black holes evaporate, and there are proton decay is also another possibility, but we don't know if that's true. So, okay, now we're 10 to the 10 to the 10 to the 10 to the 100 years in the future. There is absolutely nothing but quantum fluctuations. It could leave the audience on a good note, could go to a lower vacuum state during this time, and the universe could start over. And you've probably seen this Zoom call like an infinite amount of times already. So I'll leave with that.
So how exactly does that give us hope?
I mean, we won't know we're in the next universe, but I don't know. I'm not really into reincarnation. I won't say that. It's just from the evidence that I'm seeing, it could start over. Now, here's the question about it. Would we be sentient beings? Of course, there would be copies of ourselves, but would there be qualia? Would we be aware in these next possible universe states? Now, that I have no idea. I don't doubt that there could be another 2 versions of us having conversations in another multiverse state or a future universe. I don't doubt that. As to whether we would experience that, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
But
Does that touch on the many worlds interpretation?
yes, that's from Hugh Everett. Basically, it's a thing against the Copenhagen interpretation, which is just like, well, let me get to the wave function collapse. There's a wave function in quantum mechanics, and there's something called the double slit experiment, in which they're putting photons in 2 slits. And even as particles, they make a wave-like pattern. But when we look at what's trying to happen, it collapses into the wave function collapses. When we try to observe what's going on between the photons and the double slit and the detector on the other side, when we look at it, it's not a wave, it collapses into one state. And the Copenhagen interpretation just basically says we should look at that as it is. But the many worlds interpretation states that it's not just collapsing into one quantum state. All possible quantum states exist. We're just in this linear version of it. But all other quantum states are happening simultaneously. Now that's what you're going towards is getting on Max Tegmark. He has these different levels of multiverses. And then what you're talking, kind of going towards and with the many worlds interpretation is basically there's another Daniel, another Chavis, who, because we made another causal decision, it branched off from our universe. They exist, but it's branched off from our universe. We can't feel whatever they're doing. They feel a distinctive thing. And there's infinite amounts that range from us being this, to us being white, to us being reptiles, to us being to some other totally different state of matter. with different laws of physics and different constants. But that's basically what the many worlds interpretation is implying. Is there any empirical evidence for it? No, not at this time. With all interpretations of quantum mechanics, from cubism to many worlds to Copenhagen interpretation to Bohmian mechanics, none of them have been empirically verified. There's inferences leaning towards many worlds interpretations based off of Bayesian statistics. But as for actual apparatuses proving that without a shadow of a doubt that this is happening, there hasn't been any yet. There's just strong inferences from really bright mathematicians who are saying, well, from this apparatus dealing with the double slit experiment, I infer with statistics that every quantum state is happening at once. We just live in one of them. So that's basically what that is.
When the wave function collapses, what does that mean, right? So let me give more background to my question. The wave function is, I guess I'll give a description, right? The wave function is a pattern that we see that when we take snapshots, when we take I think a lot of snapshots, let's say we're starting a number out there, 20,000 snapshots, and we look at the locations of, let's say, an electron orbital, we get a picture of the wave function, which is, so the electron is moving in some kind of way, and this is the pattern in which it moves, or it's more of a map than a pattern. When the wave function collapses, what is going on? Is it hard to hard question to ask?
Honestly, your face is probably the same as all the physicists in the past 100 years, so it's okay. Like every physicist makes that. It keeps Nobel laureates up at night. It does. Okay? From what I can see, what's happening between the particle, even electrons act like a wave. This is dealing with wave particle duality. From what I can see is happening, it's our detectors that are the problem. I don't think our detectors are accurate enough, or we're able to use like nonlinear or chaos dynamics to properly interpret what's really going on. Because what's happening is you have the photons going in two slits, and then on the wall, no matter where the photons go, they make this interference pattern. When we look at the photon between the photon gun shooting it out and the back of the wall having this interference pattern, it collapses. I think it's now people mistakenly say that this dealing with some conscious observer nonsense it could be anything. It could be a squirrel, it could be an owl, it could be anything, just any observer. It doesn't have to even be conscious technically, but once something observes it and look at its position and momentum, it collapses into that state. I infer that it's a problem with our apparatuses more than anything else.
Yeah, I think I'm, I guess you could say, friendly or even a part of a lot of, I guess, new age communities. But I think they impart a lot of spookiness that's not needed into a lot of this stuff, and they try to it's your subconscious mind, it's collapsing the wave function. I feel like
I've heard that too many times.
The science,
you wouldn't believe how many times I've heard that.
Science and the intersection of science and theology is already interesting enough, and there's so much mystery that you could talk about there, that you don't even have to I don't know, make up stuff. That's kind of just a nonsensical one. But anyways, yeah. So you think it's our instruments that
I do. I think it's from what I may be wrong, but it seems like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is in play here. We can't know the position of momentum at the same
Mhm.
time. It seems to me that's what's one thing that's at play here as to when we directly look at it, see what it's trying to do. Now, Bohmian mechanics thinks that there's a wave carrying the particle. That's what their whole thing is, that there's waves carrying the particle to the detector, and we can't see these waves. That's not experimentally negated or proven yet. Um, but there's many, many, many interpretations of quantum
Yeah.
mechanics.
I'm a
Most
physical person, so that's what I want it to be. Because when I was taking, physical or quantum chemistry, and I was learning about this stuff, that's how I was visualizing it to be this, like, because it doesn't really make sense, this whole wave duality stuff. But if you visualize it as like a particle riding a wave,
Yes, that's Bohmian
um,
mechanics.
yeah,
Yes, that's
that's
exactly what that is. That's what he thought. He was a very intelligent man. It's just not enough evidence. I'm not against it. It's just not enough evidence at this time. But
it's just my
that's what.
bias wants it to be true. Just like I guess I have an
Yeah, that's
artistic
interesting
bias
that you're
towards
in
it.
the Bohmian camp. There are a lot. There's probably thousands, hundreds of thousands of physicists with you. They want to explore that. Better than the Copenhagen camp. I think a lot of people in that camp just because it's dogma. I'd rather see someone in the Bohmian or many worlds interpretation camp or cubism. I don't know how to completely describe that one, but
Yeah,
just look up cubism. That's a really weird one. But I'd rather people be in those than just say, well, we shouldn't even pay attention to the wave function at all. Okay, that's odd. But because there's a lot of people, there's a paper I looked up. Most people adhere to the Copenhagen interpretation because they are not even aware of other interpretations. Like I've seen an archive paper on that. They don't even know that they like. Why do you like the Copenhagen interpretation? Oh, it's the only one I've ever studied. Okay, so I'm glad you're open minded, at least, because there's a lot of established physicists who just believe in dogma for no real reason. So I'm
yeah.
glad.
I mean, I think having set dogma is a very efficient way to organize knowledge and to basically, when we make assumptions based on like what might likely be true in a non really rational way, like it's just basically our rationality and logic has its limits, so we have to make assumptions, and it makes organizing our knowledge easier. I think that's my opinion, and I think that is a limitation of science, that we in science we build models, and we make a lot of inferences, we make a lot of assumptions in those models, right? Because there's no other practical way to do it with our own minds. And maybe, I don't know, maybe AI will be able to think in a different kind of way for us. But yeah, so all this stuff makes me think about this. I'm not sure what theory it belongs to. Um, like there's a theory called the E8 theory, but I'm pretty sure that's like a sub theory of a different theory. And it's this theory about there are quote unquote higher dimensions, and these higher dimensions are where, let's say, for instance, quantum fluctuations are coming from.
Mhm.
Or, this really blew my mind when I was taking up physics 3, um, when I was learning about, like, we were learning about waves, and we were
Mhm.
learning about mediums and waves, like, waves of water, the medium is water. Waves of electricity, the medium is the electromagnetic field.
Exactly.
But all of the particles and forces of the universe exist on a more fundamental, excuse me, on a more fundamental field. Damn, I'm forgetting what the name of the field is. You know what I'm talking about? The field that permeates everything, all space time.
Mhm.
Um, there's a name for it. The Is it the quantum field? I think it's the quantum field. There's also another name for it that coincides with the Dirac theory and stuff.
Oh, you're talking about the Higgs field?
Mm,
Well, that just gives mass to particles, but
I think I'm talking about the quantum field. But yeah,
yes.
so this is a very interesting thing where because we know that particles and particles, force carrying particles and matter particles can pop in and out of existence. We're not really sure what is this thing. The Dirac hole theory is interesting, where it's just like this infinite, every point in space is an infinite hole where things can pop out of, and it's dependent on how the quantum medium, right, the quantum field, how that is vibrating, a different kind of vibration in the quantum field.
Amplitudes and frequencies. Yes.
It would arise an EMF field, which would arise, let's say, light or electrons and stuff like that. But yeah, and then how that theory is connected to this E8 theory, where the way, kind of like you were saying with the kid with the extra dimensional child blowing milk bubbles into our universe, that there's something out there that is beyond our 4 dimensions that we're familiar with, that affect things. So for instance, if you lived in a 2-dimensional world, right? Let's say that this notebook was a 2-dimensional world, and this pen was able to go through the paper.
Yes.
Everybody in the 2-dimensional world would only see a circle, right? Coming in and out of existence, right? So it would just look like a circle. In reality, it's a whole pen. It's a 3-dimensional object that's interacting with everything on this 2-dimensional plane. So the idea of the E8 theory is that everything that we are able to interact with, right, as humans, which is the 4 dimensions, we sense the 4 dimensions in a lot of different ways. Those things are a product of 5th and 6th dimensional activity that are interacting with our 4th dimension. Kind of like, if you go back in time to like the 1600s, we didn't know that there was all around us invisible EMF fields and neutrons whizzing towards us. And all of this radiation and all of these fields and forces, whether it be gravity or EMF, they're interacting with our visible worlds. All of these invisible things that are outside our regular human senses, we're interacting with these things that are invisible, but they are there, and we developed technology to be able to sense these things. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to explain it a little bit. I wanted to know, like, what do you think about that theory of these extra dimensional phenomena being tethered to 4th dimensional phenomena and the quantum phenomena and the gravity phenomena that we're trying to figure out?
Edward Witten, who was a genius, probably the most intelligent man in the world at the moment. He talks a lot about this with string theory. It could go up to 11 dimensions. I think M theory went up to 26 dimensions or something like that. But there's two distinct kind of dimensions. Calabi-Yau manifolds are one thing where the dimensions are curled up on each other. And I think you're talking about hyperdimensional. Well, there's 2 different things. There's that kind of dimensions where, for instance, if you have like this wire here, looks like a 2-dimensional thing, but it's actually a cylinder. It's a dimension curled up on itself. And that's dealing with Calabi-Yau manifolds and string theory and bosonic string theory, heterotic string theory combined to make M theory. A lot of that comes to 11 dimensions. Another thing that you're talking about is hyperdimensional space. Now, that's what you were talking about with the pen coming, it'd be like a coming in and out of existence. With a spear, it would be a circle getting big and getting small. They wouldn't even know that it's a three-dimensional object. Hyperdimensional space, that's a lot more complicated. As to whether it exists, we have no observational evidence against it. Holographic theory talks a little bit about this with Leonard Susskind, in which there are brains, hyperdimensional brains. And this is another thing dealing with quantum cosmology, in which there were these hyperdimensional brains that touched each other, and that caused the Big Bang. I forgot all about that.
Whose idea is that? Is that from Leonard?
I don't know if the thing about the brains touching each other is, but he does work in hyperdimensional brain theory, BRANE theory. It's dealing with holographic theory and things of that sort. But yeah, Leonard Susskind, I just remembered that is one of his pre-Big Bang interpretations, is that there were hyperdimensional brains touching each other. But mainly when I think of some kind of extra dimensions, the first thing that comes to my mind is string theory, because basically string theory deals with different vacua of quantum states that may be strings. It arose from Gabriel Vizianaro, I think that was his name. He was this physicist that worked with gluons, and he came up with the notion that gluons were strings. They would just vibrate, like you were saying, these vibrating strings. And it evolved from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s. And then by the 80s and the 90s, they get into what you're talking about, these hyperdimensional, nth dimensional objects that are responsible for gravity and every other force. So that is something a lot of physicists are working on. There's a lot of physicists against it. I'm in the middle. I'm not particularly against string theory. It makes a lot of sense. The only problem with string theory is they have 10 to the 500 string vacuum. That's too many strings to describe a finite amount of activity. So if they could get that to a more reasonable number, because when you put these extra dimensions in, you have more degrees of freedom once you have these extra dimensions. So it gets a lot more complicated. My only gripe with string theory is it's not that it's not testable, it's just we need more experiments for it. And two, they really need to lower the number of strings they want to represent the forces that we're talking about.
What does
I
that
don't
mean?
rule it out.
What is the 10 to the 500 strings, right? Because there's like you said, there's a finite amount of particles,
Yes.
There's only like 12 particles.
Yeah, there's not that many in the standard model, but yet they're using 10 to the 500. And at that point, it's not.
I guess I could. Does that mean like the 10 to the 500 figure, right? Is that like basically all the fermions and bosons, right? Is that the different states like of them? Because then that would actually make sense.
That would make
right?
sense. I think
like
that would be like some of their defense. Yes.
A photon, how many possible states can a photon exist in? And maybe it's if you add all those numbers together of all the fermions and bosons, maybe you'll get some kind of number. So I guess my question is, what is a string?
I was corrected on this. Okay, there's strings and string vacua. Because when I say 10 to the 500, they mean 10 to the 500 string vacua. Because I was in a debate with this. There was this there's this Afro-British man named Clifford Victor Johnson. He's one of the leading Black scientists in string theory. He works with extra dimensions and things of that sort. He's also a trumpet player. And he's debating this German woman, Sabine Hossenfelder, who just despises string theory. The Germans are just kind of like, if you don't have experimental evidence for it, you shouldn't even be working on it. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm not, not on either side, but I try to mediate in this discussion, and I say something wrong during this discussion. I'm like, well, there's 10 to the 500 strings, and she corrects me. She's like, not 9. It's not 10 to the 500 strings. It's 10 to the 500 string vacua, and a vacua is a certain quantum state. So I'm like, I'm thinking. I look it up. I'm like, damn it, she's right. It is 10 to the 500 string, but I'm wrong on this one. But when they say strings, it's basically these oscillations of frequency and amplitude of energy. Well, that's a dubious term.
Well, it's basically activity in the quantum field.
Yes, right? Activity in a quantum field. That'd be a much better, because when you start using the word energy, it starts getting dubious. So I'd rather say what you said. You're quantifying the quantum field, and it's just these different. Well, basically, what a field is, it's like the scalar field when you look at a weather radar. The orange means, and red means it's raining really heavy, and the green means that it's raining light. It's just a quantification of the strength of that field in different parts of space and time. And basically, that's what the string is. It's emulating strings, just like a violin string or something like that. The only thing is, it starts to get more complicated and getting into what you're talking about. It starts to get into like these multi-dimensional strings. It's exactly what you were talking about to describe photons, gluons, leptons, quarks, WZ bosons, gravitons.
So could we look at it like, when we see, I forgot what the name of these diagrams are, but like when we look at like a 3-dimensional plot lines, is that what the strings are? These like I think it's the 3D is like the Cartesian.
Yes.
3D, is that what is the lines on that, like graph paper? Is that what the strings are?
It started out that simple, but then it's evolved into very complex multi-dimensional objects. It started out that simple, but now it's going into what you were talking about earlier. It's very multi-dimensional. The first thing that comes to my mind,
that's the way I visualize it. And the way I visualize space-time too is just that is this all-pervasive grid paper, 3-dimensional grid paper, and that at zero energy the lines on the grid paper are straight. And when there's quantum fluctuations, there's just little.
I see what you're talking about.
That's the way that's the way I visualize. Obviously everybody's seen the diagrams of the description of like relativity and like gravity and stuff like that, and
that would be accurate. They already are, even without string theory. Most people should analyze it that way anyway. All fields are inherently massless. The only reason they become, like, the reason my hand can't go through each other itself is because the way the Higgs field interacts with massless fields, thereby giving it mass. So it is really all what you just said, like these lines and these like amplitudes. Like, for instance, a photon would have a small amplitude, and maybe a quark would have a larger one. But what gives the quark its ability to adhere to the Pauli exclusion principle, which is basically saying that two certain particles, fermions, can't be in the same quantum state, which is why we have solid matter. They are massless fields, but the way they interact with the Higgs field is what makes the Pauli exclusion principle possible. But even without string theory, your description would be accurate as to how it's quantum. Basically, what you're talking about is quantum field theory.
Yeah.
Exactly what you're talking about. With Richard Feynman and all those people. Yeah, that's basically quantum field theory, and that is how fields are supposed to be thought of. It's just with multi-dimensional fields beyond 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. a lot of the string theorists think that that was a more accurate depiction of fundamental reality.
Mm. Very interesting stuff, man.
Well, this was the best talk I've had in ages. I don't know where this is going. I just hope people see this. It's got to go somewhere. YouTube, Instagram.
Yeah, I don't know who's gonna watch it. I don't know if anyone's gonna watch it, but
Somebody will watch it eventually.
Yeah,
Somebody
yeah.
will.
I'm gonna distribute it on all the platforms. I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm gonna put it on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. And yeah, I just want to keep this going and keep interviewing people. I want to interview some of my teachers. I haven't asked them yet. Hopefully they'd be down for
You
it.
should do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know as far as like you were talking location, but as far as direction, I don't really know where this is going. But I, I at the least, I just hope to connect with people and talk to people about whether it be science or sociology. Yeah, that's my hope for this. Yeah, man. Well,
All right. I hope we do this again. Whatever topics you control the topics. So you gave me the topics. So it was the universe and really in-dimensional string theory. But yeah, hope we can do this again.
Yeah, let's do this again. Let's definitely I'd love to get more into quantum mechanics. Maybe we could I like to get more into quantum mechanics, get into the history of quantum mechanics. Germany.
Yeah.
I don't know if we had this conversation before. I know we did
Mhm.
have this conversation like last time we spoke about the culture of Germany. And
Yes.
I mean, you seem
Got
to
to do a video on that. That is, I wanted to touch on that more. I just got sidetracked. You're right. That is very vital to the history of quantum mechanics.
Yeah,
You're
I
very
mean, just
correct.
the history in general of science, and we look at philosophy and science. There's a lot of notable figures in chemistry. I studied chemistry, so there's a lot of Germans in that. Yeah, a lot of notable figures came out of that, and that is a lot of it is a result of institutions and wealth, and you touched on this. You're talking about the
Mm.
institutions and the ability for the institutions to have the instruments, and
Yes. Yeah.
there's also cultural things and stuff like that. So yeah, Germany, and I know you have like a I don't know if you would agree, but like a fascination with German culture, or
I do. I'll say it was stronger. It was stronger years ago. Now it's just kind of like it's just running off of what I was doing. Now I don't have a obsession with any particular culture. I will say that. Now, years ago, I was utterly fascinated by it. I guess what has made it, the thing is, the sad truth is that culture doesn't exist anymore. Germany is not like that as much. It's very different. So I guess that kind of took the momentum out of it. I'm still very much interested in it, but the world has changed. It's not that disciplined anymore. And I guess that's kind of, I'm still interested, but I'm not as strong about it as I was a few years ago. I know it appears that I am online, but I'm just kind of going off of the way I was a few years ago. And a few years ago, I was very much headstrong into German culture because it's like, well, these are the people who, like you just said, they came out with the first rocket, the first jet, the relativity, quantum mechanics. I still think that it's just, I guess I'm a little disheartened that that culture isn't as strong anymore. Because it wasn't just in physics, it was in music. Arnold Schoenberg and the 12 tone technique. Ludwig Wittgenstein when it came to philosophy. It wasn't just science, it was music, it was philosophy, it was all other aspects, even art with Otto Dix and a lot of people in the expressionist movement. It was way more than just, it was other things, intellectual movements. But I guess in the last few years, I will say this, I'll touch on this before I go. You have to be careful about Germany these days because there's a lot of people who, I'll just be blunt, the American right have bastardized the Germans in a lot of bad ways. The neo-Nazis have made it where, a few years ago, my fascination with Germany was just like, wow, that's great. Now it's seen with a little suspicion. And I have to remember that because we're living in a different age now. And the right-wing European men in America, I won't lie, they really bastardized the Germans. They made them look like they were just nothing but savages and just Nazis. And that did happen. I'm not saying that didn't happen, but it takes away from the scientific movement. And now liberals are like, whoa, you can't. There's a very fascist, anti-German thing going on here because, rightfully so, these people are taking this movement and bastardizing it. Has nothing to do with science, has nothing to do with discipline, has nothing to do with, regiments. It's just they're saying, well, they were white, we're white, therefore we're superior. That wasn't what happened with Germany. It was a thing is where they were technical and scientific. It wasn't just their race, but these people who, like, not trying to sound funny, I know I'm about to offend people, barely have any teeth, overweight, mud riding. I'm sure people seen the video I put up there with that. Like that, they have
Just to be
turned
clear, you're
this.
talking about the neo-Nazis and white nationalists.
Yes, the neo-Nazis and white nationalists have made it where I have to be a little bit more cautious about why I like Germany because and because their movement is dangerous. I'm not, here to say defend them in any way or like, no, it's they did storm the Capitol. They are becoming a threat to our society. So, I still have a fascination with Germany. It's just in the past few years with Trump and these people, it's kind of harder to. You're starting to see a lot of documentaries about, Heisenberg and that move and the Germans and physics back then being removed from YouTube. You're starting to see a lot of that.
Really? Are you serious?
Yeah, yes. If you go to a university, this is another thing I have to deactivate my Instagram sometimes. I have to be weary if a liberal person at a university, you know, takes it, don't think that I'm purely into it for science. If you know me, anyone who knows me knows that I'm purely into it for science. It's no, I don't like what happened with Anne Frank, and Jews are, honestly, their story is intertwined with Germany's. It's the German Jew, Einstein, Bohr, it's parallel with the Germans. If you want to look at the people who were superior in science, it wasn't just the Germans, it was the Jews too. So, I don't want people getting it confused. I have any anti-Semitic kind of views or anything, but that can be perceived as that these days because uh, it used to be where you could watch. I used to watch World War II documentaries. Sometimes I dress up like that. Wasn't a problem. Nobody looked at me funny, but now it's just different because you got these movements out here who are using this movement in Germany, which is, and theirs isn't intellectual, to try to do a coup on the American government and democracy. And it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate, but I have to I can't really be me because, without, nobody's really accused me of being on some, I mean, I post black scientists. I don't think there's any superior race, especially with human, because even the Germans made a lot of mistakes that I could get into the next time. But some people could take it differently these days. They could say like, well, you're with the white supremacist movement, knowing that I'm not, knowing that I would never want to be. I consider these people honestly somewhat inferior, but it could be taken as that. And, you have to that's why I was saying you got to be careful sadly, and I don't want it to be like this, but I have to be more careful about how I go about why I like Germany. That is just completely scientific. You got to be more careful these days because
Yeah,
it's
yeah. I can see why you perceive that. Um, and I never really put, because I mean I'm not like crazy fascinated with like German culture, so I never really put any of that out there. But I personally don't really feel any of that stuff. But again, it's probably because I've never really put any of that stuff out there. My fascination with Germany is it's almost like Germany produced a lot of positive things, and it
oh yes,
produced a lot of
yes,
negative things too. Or I mean, I guess you could say one big negative thing. And I think it's important that we study Germany for that reason, for both of those reasons. One
yes.
is how did did um did they produce so many great people? Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, all of those artists that you said, all of these German scientists, and um, like what happened? Like what was
That's been
the
something.
what is the what was the contribution? And from what I've read is it's a lot of um, the institutions they had and certain wealth and things like that. And it's probably, Jews probably contributed to, not probably, Jews contributed to that greatness immensely. So in no way am I either, and I never even thought I would have to explain that, but in no way
Same. I mean, these
am
are thoughts I've.
in no way am I isolating German greatness to homogeneous, religion or even like ethnic group. I'm just viewing the culture, but and
It
then
was.
with
It's
with with,
crazy
the, with
because.
how Germany went left.
Hmm.
Maybe I shouldn't say left. It has different connotations. Where Germany went wrong is also something that I think we need to study, because I think people, we like to point the finger and to be able to be like, that's a bad thing over there. But those people in Germany, they were people just like us, you know.
Yeah.
Um, they thought they were doing the right thing, right? I'm talking about the Germans in the 30s. I'm talking about the Nazis. They thought they were doing the right thing. So I think it needs to be studied because that can happen again.
It could.
And I hope we're not in a 100-year trend. We just had a we just had a pandemic. Like I said earlier,
Pandemic.
just had a pandemic. Hopefully, the 30s and the 40s of the 2000s are not going to be as treacherous as the 30s and 40s of the 1900s, which is again why I think that Germany should be studied.
Yeah, I hold everything you say. I wholeheartedly agree. I feel like when I was, it's weird. When I was your age, and I'm in my 30s, I thought exactly the way you just talked. It wasn't even a thing that I was isolating anyone or it was a religion. It was exactly what you just said. And I wish I really wish I still thought the way you did. I do, and I hope I can again. It's just recently the ethosphere as to what's going on in universities now is changing. You got to be careful about how people perceive you, because the people are trying to build a utopia in which no one is hurt. There's safe spaces. I don't know how I feel about that. It's not. I don't have any strong feelings against it. It's just that it's making it where we can't tap into what Germany was trying to do in terms of their intellectual movement without it being seen as extreme. And that I'm weary because this is a phenomenon I would say has just happened in the past year or two. I'll say before that, my words and thoughts were a stone's throw away from yours in terms of Germany, like how it should be studied and stuff like that. But recently, I mean, if you really keep up with Twitter, really keep up what's going on in universities, you'll see you can't be as free in thought about this as you could have say in 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that the hive, I'll call it the hive, right? What I mean by the hive is the social group, right, of society. There's always something that is being attacked because it is viewed as a threat to the well-being of the group or people within the group, or within the social group, I mean. um so I would push back on the idea that we are less free now. I just think that our as a social group, our by social group I mean humans and Americans, our what's the word I'm looking for? Priorities are a little bit different, and we have different abilities than we had before. So with the safe spaces, for instance, I think that what's going on right now globally, actually not globally, I would say
yeah, it's really America.
in well, no, I'll say in the developed world, right?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. America and other developed countries.
I think that it's not what's going on is that we have such technology that makes us so comfortable where we don't have to um, worry as much about our animalistic needs, right? So shelter, food,
Hmm.
all of these things, right? That even 50 years ago, that would be your your body would be mostly involved in that. Now we are, since we don't have to worry about food and shelter anymore, in the developed world for the most part, in the areas where people don't have to worry about food and shelter, there's more of a journey within to explore the sentimentality of trauma and all these things, and explore trauma. Um, I don't a lot of people think that's like a bad thing. There's the name snowflakes. Um, and I mean, I definitely heed to the idea that there are a lot of drawbacks from that. Um, but I think this is a result of having things being very good. Things are good, right? For people
That's
in the
true.
developed world, especially people who live in communities where they don't have to worry about food and shelter. Things are good. So you're not focused on problems of food and shelter. So you're focused on problems of processing the trauma of oppression, because everybody has uh, the trauma of oppression, because everybody has been oppressed in some way, shape, or form. Um, so where that goes back, right? Um, I think when we are strategizing about how to organize our society, we need to think about we need bad and good. What do I mean by that? Things can't be perfect for us, because if things are perfect for us, I think we'll become too soft. Um, and if things are too bad, um, we become too hard, right? Um, I think we need to construct a society like, okay, there's the utopian people, right? That they think that they're trying to, like you said, that they're trying to form a society that's almost free from pleasure. I mean, not pleasure, but pain and punishment. um I think that doesn't work because of our biology. I think that I don't think this is just fact. For hundreds of thousands of years, we've evolved to have the inputs of of pain and punishment, and it's a part of our it's a part of everything we do. And then on the other spectrum or other area, you have anarchist, which, um, I would say is, you can connect that to libertarianism, and some factions of fascist, you could say, um, where, yeah, it's just like the opposite. And I don't know. I just think that we need to find a way of organizing humans in a highly technological society that still challenges you. Because frankly, I think that's a big problem. We live in a highly technical society, and that makes everything easy for us. And I think it leads to, okay, the food thing. We have so much food that,
Oh
we
yeah.
have an obesity problem, right? Um, yeah. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but that's an interesting thing. And that's usually where I disagree with communists. I have a lot of, um, obviously I live in the Northeast, so there's a lot of liberal people here.
Oh
There's a
yeah.
lot of people who are either communist. I have friends, people that I like, associates that are communists, and I care for them. I think they're great people. Um, but that's usually where I disagree, because they think that if they could just provide for everybody, everything's gonna be okay. But I think what we're seeing with people who are provided for, that things are not great for those people, right? And
Oh no.
like, for instance, in America, um, people who are middle class Americans, right? They're, in a lot of ways, they're doing good, but in a lot of ways they're not doing good, right? Drugs, aka opioids, food, obesity, all these things. Um, so yeah, I think that there's idea that, I mean, it's almost similar to religion, as far as like the whole communist capitalism thing. Um, we're going off of books that were written, 100 years ago,
Yeah.
and,
That's
and preaching it as gospel, and that goes for people on the communist side of the aisle, and people on the, um, free market capitalism side of the aisle. And yeah, we need
because
to, I guess, be more open-minded and find a way to combine both of those things, frankly. And that also aligns with the thing we were talking about earlier of, collectivism versus individualism. I think we need to find a way to, make those work with each other.
and I'll touch on this last thing. You're right about trauma. That is what people are focused on these days. We do have food and shelter. We have our basic needs. But I will say these past few years have been a little more rough. I can honestly say, like it's subjective in a way, but I don't want to say there's a such thing as global consciousness, but there is a global mood, a way a nation feels about a particular situation. And after 9/11, there was a certain mood in our local communities. As a matter of fact, this place I live in now in East Alabama wasn't a bad place to live. I didn't mind rap music or anything like that back then. But I will say that in the past several years, it's 10 years, it's gotten really violent. A lot of my people I used to hang out with has met their demise. And I don't think that that's just localized to this area. But it's weird. There were violence, and the most violent time period in America was the early 80s. Yet it didn't manifest itself the way that it did now. And it's strange. Maybe I don't know. It's just weird that the violence, which is lower, maybe no, I think it's what you were saying too. The internet amplifies this violence. Back in the 80s when people got killed, you knew about it in your local neighborhood or whatever, and they had the funeral moved on. Now the funeral is on Facebook Live and Instagram Live, and if the person got shot, it could be on camera, and it's just analyzed almost. We're gonna get it in four. We're gonna have shootings in 4K, and we can see it on a molecular level and all this kind of stuff. But it's. I don't know if that's healthy. I don't know if we have the neurological hardware to be viewing that at this time. So maybe that's
Mm.
another reason why people are so
I like what you
crazy.
said. I like what you said, that we don't have the neurological hardware. Like I tend to think that ideologies like communism, Marxism, I'm not sure if we actually have if our neurological hardware is compatible with that ideology. And I would also posit that people got a finished product and worked backwards from the finished product. But I think what we need to do is figure out what we are, right, neurologically speaking and genetically speaking, and then work towards a result. So I think, and not just communists. I don't want to just crap on communists. I think a lot of people who have socioeconomic theories, these socioeconomic theories are not really based on a deep understanding of what we are as humans, right? Neurologically and genetically. So I think we need to take that neurological data and genetic data and just biological data and move and form a new socioeconomic philosophy, a new way to organize ourselves as humans that is compatible with our hardware. Um, um, I mean, I know you're interested in I guess realigning the hardware to adjusting the hardware so that it's compatible with a more technological society. Um, yeah, but yeah, I'm excited about all this stuff. I'm very optimistic about the future. I think that you touched on this earlier, that something that's really important that's going on right now is biology catching up with psychology and sociology.
Yes.
Because again, a lot of these psychological, sociological, socioeconomic theories are not really based on, I mean, some of it is based on, studies and, certain ways of doing certain studies, right? But some of it is a lot of models built on models on models and models,
Yeah.
and with a lot of assumptions made. But with the neurological data and the just the biological data about ourselves, I'm optimistic that psychology and biology are gonna mesh and give us a better world. But
I hope so too.
see what happens. We'll see what happens.
Well, all right. I guess I'll go. But it was great talking. This is an interesting conversation. I don't have a timer as to how long this was, but wow. I,
I think we started at like 9:30, 11,
uh,
30. Yeah, so I think we've been going for like 3 hours.
yeah, wow. That's a lot. You can chop this up into a part 1, 2, 3, 4. But usually that's what I have to do with stuff like this. I have to chop it. It's so long.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
all
I'm
right,
gonna
I'll talk.
definitely make some clips and stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, let's chat in the inbox and figure
Yeah.
out what the next topic or whatever will be, and yeah, let's keep it pumping.
Okay. Well, I'll talk to you later.
All right, man. Thanks for your time, man. Have a good night.
All right. Yeah. All right. You too.
Peace out. Okay.